It was a cold Friday night in late March, with breath visible after sunset. I was 17 in my final year of high school in Cali. Near Hikosar Park, my friends Gran, Lisa, and I sat on a low stone wall by head dunes, munching on chips and waiting. The street lights barely illuminated our spot, leaving us mostly in darkness. Around 9:30 or 10, something peculiar occurred. An unnatural silence descended, though sea waves remained. The coastal wind completely vanished. While we were joking around, Lisa suddenly pointed toward the water. Initially, I thought she might have spotted a boat's light bar, but no boat was present. Instead, 3 distinct lights hovered just above the horizon. Evenly spaced, they glowed a dull orange like dying embers, perfectly still. Their light didn't flicker or move. We stood up for a better view. The lights were positioned far enough that we couldn't determine if they were over water or in the sky. Bruce tried filming with his phone, but the bubbly screen showed only black. He tried again, wondering why it flashed. Then he shoved the phone back in his pocket. We stared at the lights for about 10 minutes, trying to make sense of them. No sound, no movement. Suddenly, the middle light dropped straight down like a ray, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The other lights seemed to blink out, leaving only the dark sea behind. We waited, hoping for something more, but nothing happened. Soon after, we rushed back, cold and silent, agreeing it was too weird to share with our parents. The weekend passed normally, but by Monday morning's first period math class, something felt off. Mrs. Goey, our teacher, left the room briefly and returned looking unsettled. During lunch, whispers from a young teacher near the staff room sent a chill through me. They were asking about the sky, a topic none of us had discussed. Lisa, Yuan, and Gran had also noticed 2 strange men walking through the school corridor. They were dressed identically in black suits, with crisp white shirts and perfectly black ties. One was tall and lean, the other shorter but broader. They seemed completely out of place in our school. Something felt off. Mr. Spidey had fallen, and Mr. Spidey had fallen. Sterling Forbes looked uneasy as men spoke quietly with him. Their glances were far from casual, seeming to mentally check off faces as we passed. By the last period, they had completely vanished. When we asked an office staff member about them, she deflected with a response that suggested she didn't want to discuss it further. That night at Lisa's, we were unsettled. We insisted we hadn't told anyone about the lights, and we were certain no online posts had been made. Strange occurrences began to accumulate over the next week. A black car regularly parked across from the school during lunch breaks. Engine off, windows up. The driver never emerged. When Gran tried getting a closer look, it drove away slowly. My phone started acting weird. During a call with Yuan, I heard strange clicking sounds and moments of dead silence. The screen recording app would open without my interaction. Lisa's mom had answered the house phone one night and heard only breathing. Weeks later, walking home after dark, I thought I spotted them across the street near the bus stop. Same suits, same stance, staring straight ahead. A passing car momentarily blocked my view, and when it moved, they had vanished. I wasn't sure if the encounter was real. The coastal path where we'd seen the lights remained a lingering mystery. I was walking up Arthur's seat, camera in hand, more out of habit than serious photography. A pale winter blue sky hung overhead, and the city felt quiet and washed out like the moment after snow melts. Halfway up the trail, something caught my attention, bright and hovering just above the eastern slope, completely motionless. Initially, I thought it might be a drone or a weather balloon, but its behavior was different, perfectly still and symmetrical. It didn't reflect sunlight like the surrounding landscape. I took several photos, carefully focusing to ensure sharp images. The object remained stationary while city sounds faded to a background hum, and an odd stillness seemed to thicken the air. Then, in an instant, it vanished. No gradual fade, no movement, just gone. At home, I examined the images on my computer. There it was in multiple shots, bright and clearly visible above the trees. Each time I zoomed and adjusted the contrast, the image reappeared. I didn't share this experience immediately. The next morning, arriving early at my small independent design studio in the old part of town, something felt different. The door burst open while I was starting my computer, shattering the quiet morning. 2 men in crisp black suits and blindingly polished shoes strode in, their footwear catching and reflecting morning light across the floor. Their appearance was precise, almost theatrical. The taller one spoke first, his tone measured and calm. "Good morning. We need to inspect your camera for errors." Something felt immediately wrong. I stammered about the camera, my voice uncertain. He nodded toward my bag, stepping closer with calculating eyes and an unnerving silence. We had previously returned on a Sunday evening, an experience that left us unsettled. Sound seemed amplified gulls, distant traffic, the wind, and no lights were visible during our brief 10-minute visit. Even now, driving that route at night, I find myself scanning the horizon for mysterious orange glows. Whenever someone at school mentions inspectors, I remember those two men who somehow knew to ask about the sky before any discussion. They scrutinized everything with methodical precision. The room, the camera, the distance between my desk and window. An inexplicable weight hung in the air, compelling me to comply. As I tried viewing my screen, they would subtly shift, blocking my perspective. After a few minutes, they exchanged a knowing glance. "Errors noted," Wong declared. "That will suffice." Then they vanished without goodbye, leaving no trace. Back home, I immediately checked my photos. A mysterious object had disappeared. Images that once clearly showed a bright shape hovering above a slope now displayed only normal clouds and sunlight. I tried different methods, raw files, alternative programs, even another computer, but nothing remained. I attempted to rationalize the experience. Maybe it imagined the object, but I knew backup files from the previous night had been intact. Now those were changed. The folder remained, but the critical frame was altered. I called my photographer friend, Mark, hoping for clarity. He suggested a lens flare, but I knew deeper currents were at play. Strange details emerged in the following week. Black cars with tinted windows parked near the studio. Unfamiliar figures lingered just beyond view. 9 coats stood motionless at the street's edge, vanishing when I looked directly at them. Rational explanations began to feel increasingly fragile. On a dark, misty night stretching across an empty road, I was driving my old white transit van southward on the A9 near Perth. Fine rain had been falling all afternoon, the kind that seems harmless until it soaks right through your jacket. Around 9 o'clock, something strange began to unfold. A light appeared in my side mirror, unlike anything I'd seen before. At first, I thought it might be a motorbike, but its movement was off too steady, without the typical wobble or height variations. The glow wasn't sharp white like an LED, but softer, almost pale. This light matched my every movement precisely. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up to 75, it matched me exactly. The speedometer needle sat at 72, becoming my only reference point in a moment that felt increasingly surreal, though I knew the speed limit for vans was 60. This long, empty road seemed to invite a different rhythm. That pale glow hung persistently in my rearview mirror, never reflecting on the road or the van's body. My hands began to sweat. Was this some kind of drone? The thought seemed absurd, given the weather and our speed. Rain blurred my windscreen, leaving only that floating orb as a clear image. When I needed to overtake a slower vehicle, the light smoothly shifted position. Aligning with my left rear quarter, just before the Broxton roundabout, it vanished. No fade, no dramatic departure, simply gone. I slowed to 50. Since that night, I've become part of an unexplained encounter that defies logic. The men in black made coincidence seem less plausible. I returned to Arthur's sea of ground to see the place again, hoping to capture another shot that would prove I wasn't imagining things. City lights twinkled below, mist rolling across the hills. My camera was ready, eyes scanning. Nothing appeared. No bright shape, no drone, no flare, but the feeling of being watched returned. Subtle, yet persistent. Shadows at the edge of my vision seemed exaggerated. Every slight movement in the fog felt like an intrusion. I've kept my camera close since then, never unattended at home or in the office. I rarely discuss the incident. There's no way to make sense of it. Sometimes I still check backup files, hoping the object will reappear, that some error might reverse itself. It never does. I can't explain their arrival or why the photos changed, only that they did. The men in black never returned. But I remained vigilant. On clear days when the wind cuts across the landscape, I remember that night. Not a strange morning at the garage began with 2 peculiar visitors. 2 men appeared, standing silently beside each other. They wore dark suits, white shirts, and thin black ties, with polished shoes showing no trace of the morning's drizzle. One was tall with a narrow face and slick-back dark hair. The other was shorter with nearly invisible pale eyebrows. Both seemed to be in their mid-40s. The tall one spoke first in a flat, emotionless voice, asking if my speedometer had stopped at 72. Confused and nervous, I laughed and insisted it worked perfectly fine. He tilted his head slightly, bird-like, and repeated the question. His companion remained absolutely silent, staring with unsettling light grey eyes that made me uncomfortable. I tried to sound normal, explaining this was a garage, and asking if they needed something fixed. They slowly scanned everything: tire racks, oil drums, the floor. The woman finally spoke, more declaring than asking, "Were you alone?" When I questioned her, she had already turned to her companion. They exchanged a look I couldn't understand. Without warning, they walked out. I followed to the door, but they were already halfway down the lane, moving in perfect synchronization toward the street. No car, no umbrella, just walking away. After they turned the corner, I noticed my phone was black despite being fully charged. No calls came through that morning, which was unusual for a Friday. I worked and tried to dismiss the encounter, but small oddities began to accumulate. Customers mentioned council workers had been asking about me. The van's dash clock randomly ran 2 hours slow. Some nights I thought I saw an old black Jaguar near the estate, but it would vanish when I tried to get closer. I'd brush it off as probably being inspectors or a drone. But something felt deeply unsettling. A month later, working late one night by the shed near Loch, I stepped out with tea as midnight approached. That's when I first truly saw them. Lights moving in a way that half expected their return. By the time I reached home in Craigie, I'd rationalized the experience as a strange vehicle light or reflection. My wife noticed my paleness, but I brushed it off as tiredness. There were white points darting across the sky in ways no aircraft or satellite should. Defying explanation, they moved in impossible patterns. Maybe 3 or 4 of them zipped across in less than a second, then stopped dead. At one point they formed a triangle before splitting apart. No sound, no trails, just strange lights dancing overhead. I stood watching, completely lost track of time. Minutes, or maybe 10, I couldn't tell. When I tried to grab my phone, the sky was already empty. I didn't tell anyone, not out of fear, but because I knew how crazy it would sound. My neighbor Ken would have just laughed it off as local folklore or military exercises. A week later, an unusual knock came at my door. 3 even taps. A pause, then 2 more. When I opened it, 2 men in plain black suits stood there. No car, no footprints on the wet gravel. They looked completely dry despite the drizzle. The taller one spoke first, his voice flat and emotionless. "Have you heard the clicking noise?" No introduction, no pleasantries. I responded, genuinely confused. What clicking noise? Now that night keeps playing in my mind. They didn't ask if I'd seen anything or been on the road. They spoke as if they already knew. I still drive that route some nights out of habit. The stretch near Litty feels different now. I keep watching the mirrors, waiting for that pale glow to reappear. It hasn't, but every time my speedometer nears 72, my palm starts sweating just like that. Night. Without thinking, I ease back down to 60. The shorter man stood silently staring at me with pale grey eyes that seemed unfocused. His face was completely blank. I asked if they were with the council, wondering if this was about the pasture or the boat. They didn't respond. The taller one scanned my hallway walls before delivering a precise instruction: "If you notice the clicking, note the intervals." As quickly as they'd arrived, they both turned and walked down the gravel drive. By the time I got my boots on and went outside, they were gone. The drive is long and straight with a clear view to the road. The only other living thing nearby was the neighbor's collie. I claimed I hadn't heard anything. The taller man tilted his head, listening like a bird. "No clicks at all," he said, though it didn't sound like a real question. In the stillness of night, drizzle and shadows were my only companions. Lying in bed, a faint clicking emerged like a fingernail tapping against glass. Irregular and persistent. The sound started subtly, pushing me to search everywhere. I checked the boiler, fuse box, and fridge, finding nothing. Each time I believed the sound had stopped, I'd restart, hearing sometimes a single sharp tap, other times a cluster that felt like an incomprehensible code. My attempts to record it revealed only room noise. Weeks passed with no men in suits returning and no strange lights appearing. I stopped acknowledging the sound, even to myself. Denial became my strategy. The radio masks the silence, covering those soft clicks. But when switched off for sleep, the sounds returned, softer, yet still present. One evening, an old black Jaguar with unreadable plates parked down the lane. As I stepped outside, it rolled away slowly without lights. The sheep remained undisturbed. 2 weeks after my initial encounter, I woke at 3 a.m. to find my kitchen light on Mena, something I'd never do. The back door was locked, but the bolt sat oddly. Small details seemed slightly off. My mug had moved from sink to table, and my boots were turned outward. The clicks evolved. Less random now, more structured, 3 quick taps a pause, then 2 exactly matching the original knock. Though I hadn't seen the men again, a persistent feeling of being watched crept in during my late-night smoking breaks. No movement, no shapes, just an unsettling presence. I kept silent. How could I explain this to Callum or anyone else? 3 weeks had passed since their initial visit. No follow-up, no letters, just one haunting question lingering. Have you heard the clicking noise? Late October found me camping near Loch Lomond, cold and damp. Fog rolled off the water in thick waves. I'd chosen a secluded clearing near the northern shore, far from the main parking area. My plan was simple: set up the tent, start a fire, spend the night reading and listening. By 8 p.m., the fog had thickened. The trees became almost invisible. The water lay flat, a dark sheet reflecting nothing. As I leaned back in my folding chair, the lights first caught my attention. 2 small, bright white dots like headlamps appeared. They were fellow campers, but something felt off. Standing perfectly upright and human-sized, they didn't move. The more I watched, the more certain I became that these weren't ordinary figures. Dark suits blended into the misty landscape where no path, road, or dock existed. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it might be a fog-induced illusion. Yet when I looked again, they remained. The landscape shifted as fog gradually dissolved, revealing rigid, unnatural shapes. My fire crackled softly while hours passed. These figures stood motionless, just beyond my peripheral vision, dark outlines merging seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. Initially, I attempted to dismiss their presence, rationalizing it as a trick of my imagination. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. 1 hour melted into 2, and they remained perfectly still. Glimpses caught between tending my fire and preparing water revealed their persistent presence. A momentary shift might have been a fog-induced illusion. Something inexplicable prevented me from calling out. This wasn't traditional fear, but a strange awareness that my presence mattered in ways beyond comprehension. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, dense fog obscured nearly everything, including the shoreline. When I finally swept my flashlight across the landscape, the men had vanished completely. No trace remained where they had stood. I searched trees and surroundings, finding nothing. The water lay flat and empty. Then, soft leaf crunching broke the silence. 2 figures emerged from the terrain where no path existed, walking deliberately towards a distant point before disappearing behind tree lines. Their black silhouettes blended perfectly with the night's misty veil. At dawn, when mist lifted, I inspected the ground meticulously. No footprints, no crushed grass, not even a broken twig indicated their presence. The clearing appeared untouched. I packed my gear slowly, half expecting their return. During the drive back to my Glasgow flat, I continually checked the rearview mirror. The A82 stretched empty behind me. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt dreamlike. Something meant to be forgotten, yet impossible to dismiss. Our family farm, situated about 15 miles outside the city, had been in our possession since my grandfather's time. A stone farmhouse, scattered fields, and a lonely barn defined the landscape. Late October brought those characteristically damp, thick nights. One such night, with stars blurred behind a misty curtain, I ventured to the north field around midnight. Unsettled sheep had drawn me out. Suddenly, a glow hovered just above the terrain's far end. Initially, I suspected a helicopter or searchlight, but no sound accompanied the phenomenon, no distant engine hum, no rotor noise. This wasn't a standard light beam. It seemed contained almost part of a solid shape, yet impossibly difficult to define. Weeks later, retracing my route to the clearing, I found nothing. The shoreline empty, the trees unchanged. But what I'd seen was real. I camp often, usually alone, and I've never witnessed anyone appear and disappear like that. When I tried talking to friends, most dismissed it as fog, playing tricks, or other campers. But I knew what I saw. These figures, whoever they were, had been waiting. I had somehow stumbled into their observation, and I couldn't rationalize the experience. Maybe they were watching me, but I don't know why or what they wanted. The next morning, with highland fog draped low like a wet cloth, I stepped outside to feed the animals. At the far edge of my property, just past the stone wall overlooking the north field, 2 men in black suits stood completely motionless. Their presence felt distinctly wrong. They weren't talking or moving, just staring straight up at the sky. Their suits seemed out of place in this damp hillside setting, but their absolute stillness was even more unnerving. No shifting weight, no adjusting feet, no visible breath. Since that night, I haven't seen anyone in a black suit. I haven't returned to that campsite after dark. But sometimes, driving along the A82 after work, when the light hits the water in a certain way, I catch a shadow or a flicker in the corner of my eye. I swear I see them standing at the edge of the loch, still watching. I tell the story only now because it's been years and it's stayed with me, tucked into the back of my mind, where I can't quite reach it. Some nights, I still picture them out there, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even writing this, I check the windows, half expecting to see them on the far shore, standing silently, staring back. Flat grass marked the spot where they had been standing. I scanned the fields, the lane, and the small road running parallel to my land, but found nothing. My chores that morning had been unsettling from the start. While preparing feed buckets, I kept glancing back at the figures on the hillside. They were like statues, perfectly still. My gut warned me not to call out. I glimpsed pale skin, dark hair, and possibly sunglasses, though the sun hadn't fully risen. I tried to ignore them and continue my work, but each time I looked up, they remained watching the sky. About 10 minutes passed. At one point, I turned my back completely to enter the barn for another feed sack. When I returned just 30 seconds later, they were gone. No car, no footprints on the damp grass, just an empty hillside and rolling fog. The sheep had been restless while I was in the barn and had moved to the opposite end of the field. My dog, normally fearless, stood at the barn door with his tail down, refusing to cross the fence line. Even when I called him that night when the mist rolled back and the stars came out, I felt a soft, rhythmic pressure in my ears like being underwater. Nothing moved in the sky. The sheep huddled tightly by the barn, and I watched through the window, lights off, scanning the property's edge for any movement. For 3 more mornings I checked the field at dawn. No men in suits appeared, no mysterious glow above the trees, but the sheep remained reluctant to graze in the north field. They'd take a few steps in then, back away clustering together, as if an unseen force kept them at bay. Later, Claire and I had just finished unpacking boxes in her new terrace house near Dundee's outskirts, well past midnight. The residential road was short, lined with old brick houses, and a single orange street light marking the corner. When we stepped outside for some air, the stillness was unnerving. No distant cars, no barking dogs, just absolute quiet. Claire lit a cigarette and motioned for me to look up. Over the rooftops, not far above, a triangular shape hung in the night sky. We stood completely motionless. A strange object marked by 3 points of white light with a faint red glow in the center suspended above us. It wasn't massive, but close enough that we could make out its darker edges against the sky. The thing simply hung there, completely stationary. We whispered to each other, though neither of us understood why we were being so quiet. 1, 2, 3, like stage running lights. This repeated twice before everything went completely dark. No movement when it disappeared. No sudden speed, no upward climb. It simply wasn't there anymore. Claire tried to capture it on her phone, but the screen stayed black, refusing to record anything. After 2 attempts, she gave up. We stood shivering, staring at the empty sky, until Claire finally said, "Let's go inside." That night, neither of us slept well. We didn't tell anyone, not our neighbors, not our families. We barely discussed it, between ourselves afterward. This wasn't the first time I'd encountered something inexplicable. Weeks earlier, an invisible barrier had prevented movement in a specific area. I'd eventually stopped trying to force through and fenced off the space. Standing at its edge felt different. The air seemed heavier with a quiet pressure almost tangible against my skin. I never saw those two silent men in black suits again, the ones I'd spotted staring at the sky, who never missed anything. I've had strangers pass through before, lost hikers, surveyors, kids on bikes, but nothing like this. Nothing that leaves an entire field feeling so fundamentally wrong. A week later at the bus stop on the high street, a man approached from the opposite direction. His appearance was striking: a black overcoat, black suit, white shirt, and black tie. No hat or gloves, despite the cold, neatly parted hair and clean-shaven. He stopped a few feet away and looked directly at us. Without a greeting, he asked clearly, "Did the lights blink in sequence?" Before Claire could respond, he turned and walked away. Not hurriedly or nervously, just a calm stroll back the way he'd come, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. Now, whenever I step outside at night, I find myself glancing at that terrain, half expecting the glow to return or those two figures to reappear, their attention fixed on something beyond my comprehension. We sat frozen. The bus came and went without us. Strange events followed. One evening, leaving Claire's place, I spotted a black car parked at the street's end. Engine off, windows tinted, the driver's silhouette barely visible. When I approached, the car started and rolled away slowly, as if it knew. Claire mentioned her landline rang twice late at night, each time with no one there, just a faint clicking sound like an old tape recorder. Another night, a bright white light appeared through the curtains with no engine noise. By the time I looked, the street was empty. Weeks later, standing at the same bus stop, I saw a tall figure at the street's far end under a lamp, wearing a black coat, hands in pockets, completely motionless. A passing bus blocked my view, and when it moved, the figure had vanished. We tried reasoning it out. Maybe a new drone type. Perhaps someone had overheard us, but nothing made sense. We had been completely alone when we saw the craft. We hadn't told anyone. The only people who knew were me and Claire, and she swore she hadn't mentioned it to a soul. By January, Claire moved closer to the city centre. The car stopped showing up. The phone calls ceased. We never got an explanation. Driving home late one night from a friend's place near Stirling, the roads were quiet and slick with a thin mist settled over the hills. My headlights cut through the fog in long, narrow beams. As I carefully watched the roads bend, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a shadow, maybe a fallen branch. Then it moved, crossing the road slowly and deliberately, completely silent, a black shape low to the ground with edges that didn't reflect my headlights like a normal object would. I slammed the brakes instinctively, heart pounding. This didn't move like an animal. Instead, it glided smoothly across the road and disappeared into the mist. I sat gripping the wheel, convinced I must have imagined it, but my eyes were playing tricks. Who would believe such a story? I told no one, not friends, not my partner. Continuing home slowly, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror. The mist hung low on the streets. An unsettling feeling of being watched consumed me. A few nights later, I was having a late dinner in my flat, the radiator humming softly in the background. A deliberate slow knock interrupted my meal. Most people who visited at this hour either called ahead or didn't knock at all. When I opened the door, two men stood before me dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, black ties, and shoes that gleamed in the hallway light. Their faces were blank, pale in the porch's glow. "Good evening," one said evenly. "9 is your vehicle. Still functioning?" The question seemed odd, yet something in his tone suggested he knew something I didn't. I responded with a slightly higher pitch, "Yes." They nodded briefly, offering no further explanation. The shorter man studied me intently, not threateningly, not friendly, just observing. Before I could ask what they meant, they vanished down the stairs into the fog. No car started, no footsteps faded. They were simply gone. Strange occurrences quickly became my new routine. Streetlights flickered at odd intervals. Shadows dancing at my periphery matched no visible object. Waiting for buses at night, I'd constantly look over my shoulder, half expecting a man in a black suit to ask a question I couldn't answer. While cutting across the park near the canal, I spotted a line of lights hanging low, moving differently from any aircraft I recognized. They were too quiet, too close, with lights that didn't match anything I'd seen before. Since that moment, things felt increasingly strange. I started logging these unusual moments on my phone, tracking each occurrence. Sometimes, when scrolling back, I'd find entries I didn't remember writing. Notes in my own handwriting described times and places I wasn't sure I'd been. Was I sleepwalking, dozing off while driving? No accidents had happened, no bruises. Just a growing sense of disorientation. The foggy grocery run changed everything. Mist clung heavily to the road. Suddenly, a low black shape silently crossed in front of my car, moving between fog and headlights as if belonging to another world. I slammed the brakes. It vanished. No sound, no trace, as if it never existed. That night, sleep was impossible. I stared at my car in the driveway, barely visible in the dim streetlight. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like a warning. I imagined someone watching, checking if the car still worked. Eventually, I tried returning to normal. I drove less at night, avoided certain roads, kept windows closed. The men in black never returned. No knocking, no watching. The black shape disappeared, at least from my view, but the memory lingers. During my commute, I repeatedly noticed unusual black cars, older sedans with heavily tinted windows, always parked in strange locations, always seemingly empty. I started noticing something was off late at night. The feeling of being watched crept over me, growing more intense with each passing evening. I'd check locks and windows multiple times, an uneasy sense that something wasn't right. Dark figures seemed to move at the street's edge, vanishing when I got closer. A distant car engine would start, only to reveal nothing on the road. This wasn't just my imagination. A low vibration burrowed deep into my chest, extending beyond the walls of my flat. One night, something truly bizarre happened. 6 or 7 white spheres appeared in the sky, glowing and shifting, connected by what looked like an invisible thread. They hung suspended for maybe half a minute before tilting and sliding behind the clouds. No sound, no trail, just gone. When I mentioned this to Graham on the radio, it was a brief, unremarkable description. He joked that I needed another drink as usual. That should have been the end of it. But then the stranger arrived. Paul was around 6'2", dressed in a pressed black suit with a white shirt buttoned all the way up, no tie. His appearance was striking, pale skin, a narrow face, dark hair, combed flat. He looked to be in his early 40s, though something about him was hard to define. His eyes were particularly unsettling. Not their color, but the way he stared unblinkingly, as if eye contact was a skill he hadn't quite mastered. "Mr. Stare, Princess Mr. Stare, Stare Parker," he said. That was my name, so I nodded. He didn't introduce himself or offer a handshake. Instead, he walked into my living room with calculated steps, pausing to scan the surroundings. His gaze swept over my bookshelf, a half-empty water glass, and a stack of unopened mail. Then he turned to me and spoke with an unnerving calmness. He wanted to know about the sound patterns I'd noticed. This caught me completely off guard. I hadn't mentioned any sounds to anyone, not even on the radio when I'd initially described the incident to Graham. The whole thing had been eerily silent. I told him exactly that. No hum, no vibration, nothing. Just lights. He tilted his head slightly, as if he didn't quite believe me. His words were slow and deliberate, seemingly rehearsed. Again, I insisted, just lights, nothing more. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity before sitting in my armchair without invitation, moving with a strange, stiff precision. He folded his hands on his knees and began asking about the exact arrangement of the lights. I tried to describe it as best I could, but the entire encounter felt increasingly surreal. At Cuffs Hospital, a small regional facility near Manchester, most nights were predictable. Patients with typical ailments like falls or respiratory problems usually filled our beds. But one night about 6 years ago, everything changed. Around 1:30 in the morning, paramedics brought Alan Webster from nearby. His arrival was different from our usual admissions. During our encounter, something peculiar unfolded. He spoke about brightness shifting in cycles, using precise words like pulses and cycles. He kept interrupting with specific questions about how lights worked. asking if they pulsed in sequence, if they overlapped, or if their movements followed any particular pattern. His intense focus made me uneasy. No notebook, no phone, just sitting and staring, asking questions that seemed oddly specific. When he asked if I'd experienced unusual dreams since a certain sighting, I was caught off guard. I denied having strange dreams, but admitted to waking up suddenly at night, heart racing with no memory of what I'd been dreaming. I kept the most unsettling details to myself. After about 20 minutes, he stood up abruptly. Without saying goodbye or thank you, he cryptically stated, "If you notice the sounds, you will know what they mean." He walked to the door, opened it himself, and stepped into the hallway. Curiosity drew me to follow him. He descended the stairs slowly, almost mechanically, leaning over the railing. I expected to hear the front door open, but there was only silence. After waiting a minute, I went downstairs. The entryway was empty, and outside only one car sat under the street lamp. No trace of him remained. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept replaying our conversation, particularly his comment about sound patterns. Something felt off. Was there a sound I'd missed? Or was he deliberately planting ideas in my mind? A week later, something strange happened. While brushing my teeth with the bathroom window cracked open, I heard a low, steady hum. Initially, I thought it might be the boiler or distant traffic, but it wasn't. The sound was deeper, more consistent, like standing near an electric transformer, yet coming from outside. I turned off the tap and listened. The hum lasted about a minute before fading completely. Rushing to the window, I scanned the street. Everything looked normal. The same cars, the same empty pavement. I never saw the man again, a wiry man in his late 30s, wearing muddy boots and a jacket. Alan Webster was visibly distressed, constantly trying to sit up and looking toward the window. He seemed to be expecting something to still be present. His dog had run off and hadn't returned. When I questioned him about his experience, he described a silent disk of light circling over the tree. No sound at all. That's the worst of it, he emphasized, his speech slurred, suggesting he was recovering from a faint. He kept repeating, "I was right above me." I couldn't move. The lights were everywhere. The paramedics seemed dismissive, rolling their eyes and muttering about late-night television. Despite his state, we admitted him for overnight observation. Alan claimed he blacked out when something moved overhead, and upon regaining consciousness temporarily lost sensation in his hands. I documented everything professionally, though. Part of me attributed his account to stress or dehydration. He smelled of wood smoke and had collapsed in a field after calling emergency services himself while walking his dog. His vitals were stable. Around 3 a.m., while completing charts at the nurse's station, 2 men entered the ward through the main doors. This immediately struck me as odd, since we locked down everything at that hour, and visitors must buzz the front desk downstairs. Both wore standard black suits with white shirts and black ties with polished shoes. One was shorter, bald with pale skin. The other taller, dark-haired, appearing to be in his early 40s. What unsettled me most was their synchronized, purposeful movement, no wasted motion. Walking directly to the desk, the shorter man asked in a flat tone, "Where is Mr. Seppert?" Step 1. Where is Mr. Second? Step a store? Where is Mr. Store? Star. Where is Mr. Starter? P. Where is Mr. Breyer? Staver. P. Star care pair. Hospitals can be strange places, especially late at night. There was something unsettling about the 2 men who showed up at my desk, both staring intently, claiming to be from administration. Their appearance and behavior felt off. The taller man's voice was calm, but his accent suggested he wasn't local or even clearly British, almost like he had learned the words phonetically. I told them visiting hours were over, but the shorter man leaned closer, his fingernails oddly smooth like plastic. "We need to speak with Mr. Then to speak to Mr. Stouter Webster. Now," he said in a way that made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I gave them his room number, but insisted I check with the charge nurse before letting them in. They didn't wait, walking past me down the hall, their shoes clicking rhythmically. By the time I reached the room, the door was already closed. Through the glass panel, 2 men flanked Alan's bed. He was wide awake, eyes darting between them, mouth moving rapidly, though no sound reached me. One man held a notepad but wasn't writing. I tapped the door, but no one turned. For a brief moment, Alan's eyes met mine, terror unmistakable. The taller man leaned in, whispered something, and Alan's face went blank. They remained about 10 minutes. When they left, I tried to ask for identification. He has been discharged. The tall man stated directly, offering no paperwork or consultation. I rushed into the room. Alan's bed was empty, sheets pulled back. He was gone, not in the bathroom, not in the hallway. His clothes and boots had vanished too. I attempted to chase the men, but the corridor was empty. Running to the stairwell and lobby yielded nothing. Security insisted no one had entered through the front doors in the last half hour. By morning, things became stranger. Alan's admission record had disappeared from the system. No file, no wristband existed. When I inquired, they claimed the patient number I provided didn't exist. Paramedics who brought him in denied ever transporting anyone by that name. I checked the incident book, confirming my 1:45 a.m. entry for Alan Webster. But now it was as if he had never existed. Alan and his companion had vanished without a trace. No one seemed to remember him clearly. Claire, a night aide, offered a strange revelation. She had witnessed 2 men escorting Alan from his room, walking unsteadily like someone sleepwalking. CCTV footage showed a mysterious 15-minute gap during that time. No discharge papers were filed. No doctor signed off. Officially, Alan Webster was never admitted. Weeks after his disappearance, odd occurrences haunted me. Stairwell lights flickered when I was alone. Automatic front doors unexpectedly opened around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. during my late shifts. Once, I spotted a black sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. The moment I turned to look directly, it slowly drove away without headlights. I never saw Alan again. I'd fished this area for years, always hoping to catch a trout or 2 for dinner. That morning, something unusual broke my concentration. The water began moving strangely, not from wind or fish, but something deeper and more mysterious. The soft glow appeared beneath the surface, shifting slowly, as if following a hidden pattern. Nothing was out here, yet the glow moved in almost perfect arcs, sometimes disappearing and reappearing a few feet away. I watched longer than intended, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Eventually, I packed up and shook my head, telling no one about the experience. The next morning at the dock, while cleaning my nets, I noticed a distinctive black sedan parked at the far end. Old and weathered like something from the 90s, it sat with tinted windows darker than usual. 2 men in crisp black suits and gleaming shoes stepped out, walking toward me with an unsettling precision. The tall one spoke first, his voice calm and flat. "How many times have you seen the movement?" I blinked, uncertain what he meant. I hadn't told anyone about the previous night's strange occurrence. These strangers seemed to know something they shouldn't, and I claimed I didn't understand. The shorter man stepped closer, his ash-grey eyes fixed on me steadily. "You know the pattern, the light," he said. Something in his gaze made me uncomfortable. I finally admitted I'd seen it only once, and even speaking those words felt wrong. A quick glance passed between them so fast I almost missed it. Confusion, disbelief, or something else entirely flickered in that exchange. They turned and walked back to their car with an unnatural gait that didn't seem quite human. They neither fully opened their door before sitting, and the car started without a sound, sliding into the gravel like morning mist. Then it was gone, as if it had never existed. I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself I'd imagined it. But, later, something unsettled me. When I checked the dock, there were no traces. The gravel remained undisturbed with no tire tracks. It was pristine, as if nothing had happened. That evening, I returned to the dock. The water surface was smooth and black, silent, yet I knew something was different. The memory of 2 men who knew something I never said haunted me, a secret I kept even from my wife. Nate, September. About 10 years back, life in my small Aberdeen village moved slowly. 2 shops and a pub marked the entire community. Beyond the main road, no street lights pierced the darkness, and on clear nights, stars spread unbroken across the sky. Just after 11 one night, I walked home from a friend's house. Early autumn's sharpness hung in the air, and fields lay heavy with cut silage. My torch guided me along the dirt path, helping me avoid tripping. When I looked up, something unusual caught my eye above the trees. A shape blocked out part of the stars. At first I thought it was a cloud, but its form was too precise. 3 straight edges, forming a perfect triangle. I stopped completely still. The object moved slowly, silently, gliding without sound. No engine noise, no branch rustling like a low-flying plane might cause. 3 steady, unblinking white lights outlined its edges. It passed directly overhead in maybe 20 seconds. I didn't run home, but I felt frozen, my body unsure how to react. Something about those 2 men who asked questions lingered in my mind. They were precise, methodical, checking a record I didn't know existed. The way they looked at each other after I spoke was strange. They vanished like they were never real. Now, when the wind is right and the dock is dark, I sometimes imagine them walking up the hill toward my cabin again. Part of me wants answers, but another part knows I'd rather not find out. So I watch from the hill's edge, letting memories sit quietly like the water surface, a place I'll never fish near again. I packed up early and walked back to my small cabin, scanning the terrain constantly. I saw no one but kept looking, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a suit or a watch reflection. For nights afterwards, shadows near the dock's edge haunted my peripheral vision. They were outside my window, but every time I stepped out, they disappeared. No car, no people, nothing. The dock seemed different somehow, quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Sleep became a restless replay of those moments. The next morning brought bright streets washed clean by recent rain. Walking to the shop, I was halfway down the lane. Near the old church, a man appeared suddenly, stopping directly in my path. His appearance stood out starkly, a black suit. White shirt and thin black tie were unusual in our small village, reserved typically for Sunday services or funerals. His presence was unsettling, with pale skin and dark eyes fixed in an unnatural, unmoving stare. He spoke, asking calmly but with an odd tone, "Did he craft rotate?" The question caught me completely off guard. How could he know about something I hadn't even fully understood myself? When I asked him to clarify, he repeated the exact words, almost reflexively. Without thinking, I responded that the object had simply glided flat, instantly realizing I'd revealed more than intended. He nodded, as if confirming something, then walked away down the narrow street by the church. Something urged me to follow, but when I turned the corner, the lane was inexplicably empty. I walked to the turn's end, emerging into an open field with no possible hiding spots, no gates, no vehicles. Nothing explained his sudden disappearance. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to unsettle me. My typically calm dog would bark repeatedly at the garden gate, always just before 2 a.m. Once, I thought I glimpsed a car idling at the field's edge, its lights extinguished. The phrase, "Did he craft rotate?" persistently echoed in my mind. Laura and I had planned a weekend camping trip, eager to test her new gear before autumn arrived. Late August brought warm days but chilly nights requiring a good sleeping bag. We found a perfect campsite off a forestry track on the north side, a flat piece of ground overlooking the loch, with the farmhouse's faint lights barely visible in the distance. The silence was profound. Every water ripple and branch movement seemed amplified. After dinner we sat by the water's edge, quiet and listening. Around 11 o'clock, when darkness had fully settled, Laura spotted something unusual. What initially appeared as a star reflection transformed into something extraordinary. A pale light moved in ways no conventional aircraft could. That night at the loch was unlike anything I've experienced before. A yellow sphere about the size of a lantern hovered roughly 100 feet above the water's surface. 2 more spheres gradually joined it, maintaining precise distances. Aircraft whiteys glowed steadily with a strange pulsing quality, making the water beneath shimmer. They moved silently across the loch, performing an inexplicable dance. At one point they lowered closer, creating mirror images, 3 spheres above, 3 reflecting below. After about 15 minutes they rose higher and vanished without trace or sound. Returning to the tent, we were mostly silent. That night I lay awake, listening intently for unusual sounds. Nothing came, just occasional fish splashes and wind through heather. The next morning, while unzipping the tent, I noticed 2 men standing nearby. Their attire was bizarrely out of place in our remote wilderness setting, dark suits, black ties, and crisp white shirts, neat and uncreased, as if they'd materialized from nowhere. Weeks later, a strange man approached me, asking peculiar questions about rotation. He seemed intensely interested in some specific detail, then suddenly disappeared. No one in the village ever mentioned seeing him, and I never saw him again. We were heading home after dinner at my sister's place in Oak Ridge, traveling along dark back roads with trees and occasional pastures. It was early October, with a cool crispness in the air and an unusually clear sky about halfway home near some farmland. Marissa spotted something first, a cluster of lights hovering low above a row of trees a couple 100 yards off the road. Initially I thought it was a plane, but the pattern was off. These weren't blinking aircraft lights. They glowed steadily, 3 white and 1 red, arranged in a diamond shape. What struck me most was how unnaturally still they were. We slowed down and stopped on the shoulder to get a better look. The object hung silently in place. It wasn't like a helicopter, no rotor sound, no vibration in the air. Slowly, the lights seemed to rotate and then drift sideways, parallel to the road. Days later, we encountered something equally strange. 2 men appeared without warning or introduction. One was tall with very short, dark hair. The other had lighter hair. They asked us repeatedly if we'd heard a hum. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The memory of those light spheres and those oddly dressed men remains vivid and unexplained. We were driving through the forest when everything changed. 2 men appeared out of nowhere, and our silence became heavy with unspoken tension. We'd been watching something unusual, a strange object that sat motionless. We drove home in complete silence after what we'd just witnessed, as if talking might somehow make things worse. Later that day, Laura noticed the sheep hobbling slightly against the fence, seeming to distance themselves from something unseen. When we turned onto our street, our headlights illuminated 2 tall, thin men standing at our door. Their skin looked almost grey, and they wore dark suits. Unlike most people, they didn't turn to look at our car. Instead, they stood motionless, facing the front door, like they'd been waiting there for hours. Marissa grabbed my arm. "Who are they?" she whispered. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my mind struggling to comprehend the situation. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd seen. We hadn't even fully discussed it with each other. Yet, these 2 men were already waiting at our house. Before we could get out of the car, both men turned in perfect unison and started walking toward us. Their movements were stiff but deliberate, like an awkward imitation of human walking. I rolled the window down halfway as they approached. One leaned toward the window, his eyes impossibly dark, his expression unchanging. "Did you see it land?" he asked in a flat, mechanical voice. That was all. Marissa and I just stared. My heart raced. The way he phrased the question made my stomach twist, as if they already knew exactly what we had witnessed. "No," Marissa finally answered quietly. The man stared at her, then straightened up. He glanced at his companion, who remained silent and still. We never camped at that site again. One detail haunted me, how absolutely certain those men had been that we'd heard a hum. We were sitting in the car, stunned into silence after witnessing something inexplicable. The house felt different when we finally stepped outside. Empty, yet something lingered. The yard seemed quiet, but the silence was heavy. Sleep was impossible that night. Every tiny noise outside made us alert, listening intently. Around 3 a.m. I got up and double-checked all the locks. Everything was in place, but the atmosphere felt strange, as if we weren't alone. The next morning I questioned our neighbors. No one had seen anything unusual on the street. I even drove up and down, scanning for any out-of-place vehicles. Nothing. What haunts me most is how precise their inquiry was. They didn't ask general questions like, "Did you see something?" The ferry ride from St. George's was supposed to be routine. It was late July, with cool Atlantic air and a pale blue sky. Everything seemed normal. Earlier that evening, I'd been on the eastern cliff, filming gulls and waves with my phone when the lights appeared. Low over the water, maybe half a mile offshore, 3 white lights with a green tinge moved together as if connected. They weren't helicopters, and there was no sound. As I watched, they shifted, splitting apart and reforming into a triangle. I filmed until the image became grainy. Then, suddenly, they vanished. When I boarded the ferry, I noticed 2 men sitting near the rear cabin window, dark suits, white shirts, black ties, unusual attire for a summer evening ferry. Their hats sat neatly beside them, perfectly still. They didn't speak to each other, or anyone else. At first, I didn't think much about them, but something felt off. The ferry crossing was unlike anything I'd experienced before. As I walked near the gangway, I noticed two men who stood out immediately. They weren't like the other passengers. No scrolling, no glancing around, no shifting in their seats, just pure, unbroken staring. Then they turned and walked down the driveway, not hurried, not slow, just steady, like following a predetermined path. I thought they might have a car parked on the street, but when they reached the end of the drive, they didn't cross the road or head toward any vehicle. They just kept walking side by side until the darkness swallowed them past the streetlight. I was working my family's farm outside Stirlingshire, a quiet life of sheep and barley that had been mined since I could drive a tractor. The first odd thing occurred just after dusk on a Wednesday. I was splitting wood in the yard that afternoon when a black car rolled down our muddy lane. The car looked too polished for our rough track. Two men stepped out, both tall, dressed in dark suits and hats that seemed out of place, too crisp and clean for our rural setting. Earlier that night, I'd noticed something unusual in the north pasture. At first, I thought it was moonlight, but these were three distinct lights hanging in a tight triangle above the field. They moved almost lazily, yet remained perfectly aligned. No sound, no explanation. "Did you see it land?" they asked. I felt like they already knew exactly what we'd witnessed and were just confirming our observation. Their departure with no car, no sound, no trace remains completely inexplicable. The ferry was eerily silent, marked only by a strange glow moving overhead. Something about the two men felt deeply unnatural. Their skin was extraordinarily pale, almost waxy, with a smoothness that seemed airbrushed. They hardly blinked, standing in stark contrast to the other passengers. One of them spoke first, his accent unlike anything I'd heard before. Not English, not Scottish, something altogether different. I'd been watching those peculiar lights for maybe 10 minutes, when they suddenly rose and shot away from the ferry. Both were tall, with dark hair combed meticulously back, their posture rigid and precise. Walking past their table, an inexplicable sense of unease washed over me. The shorter man's hands were folded perfectly still, his long, thin fingers not moving a millimeter. I sat a few rows behind them, observing intently the woman with two children walking to get snacks. Didn't seem to notice anything unusual. In fact, no one appeared to see how strange these men were. At one point, the taller man turned his head slightly. I could swear his lips formed a silent word. The other man tilted his head almost imperceptibly, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Coincidentally, the ferry horn sounded near the dock. Both men straightened simultaneously, like soldiers snapping to attention. After disembarking, I lingered on the pier, pretending to tie my shoe while watching the other passengers, fishermen, teenagers with bikes, couples. These two men had completely vanished. I checked the ferry windows. Their booth was empty. No one was on deck. Later, I would review grainy phone footage of strange lights. These men had appeared and disappeared so quickly, leaving only questions. This happened during a grey autumn, with a damp chill that cut through multiple layers. That night, sleep evaded me as I kept replaying the scene of something vanishing upward into low clouds without a trace. By morning, I'd rationalized it as some kind of military exercise. I called the nearby Air Force Base to report what I'd seen. The man who answered was polite but brief, simply noting the time and location before saying, "Thank you, sir." Something felt off about the entire interaction. Later that week, an unexpected development occurred. These men suddenly wanted to see my flock of sheep. I hesitated but felt strangely compelled to comply. Their silent, waiting presence made me deeply uneasy. On a cold Tuesday in October, I missed the bus after my algebra test ran longer than expected and decided to walk the half-mile home. My headphones were briefly in, then out. I'm particular about hearing the world when I'm alone. At first, it was just a light near the old water tower. One bulb that seemed like a spotlight, but something was different. The light didn't sit on the power line pole. Instead, it hung in the air about 20 feet above the sidewalk, right past the library steps. A pale circle like a paper plate with a soft glow. No halo, no beam, just a steady disc. I stopped walking. My hands were tucked in my hoodie pockets. and my breath formed small clouds. The light was perfectly still, no flickering, no humming. The leaves didn't move when it shifted slightly to the left. As I followed the street, it followed me too, maintaining the same distance like a shadow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what happened. South Paddock had always been an easy place for herding sheep. At first, the animals followed my guidance toward the sheds without hesitation. But something changed. One night, they refused to move near the shed area. Instead, they bunched tightly at the gate, stamping their hooves and bleeding, completely resistant to my attempts to lead them. Forced to adapt, I redirected the flock to the smaller eastern field. Initially, I dismissed their behavior as typical animal unpredictability, yet the pattern persisted. Each subsequent night, they avoided the South Paddock with an almost deliberate avoidance. Even during daylight hours, they would huddle at the far field's edge if they wandered near at all. A week later, I personally witnessed something strange. Through the gate of the South Paddock, where most of the sheep were grazing, two figures followed in complete silence, their shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. At the fence, the shorter one leaned against a post, staring intently at the sheep. The taller one turned to me and stated, "This is all of them." "Most," I answered, my voice small and uncertain. They nodded simultaneously in a slow, synchronized movement that made my stomach knot. Without another word, they turned and walked back to their car. I stood watching, unsure of what had just happened. And I walked the field carefully, searching for any signs of disturbance. Earlier that day, some men had been standing at the fence, gripping the wooden posts tightly. By the time I approached, they were already driving away, not once looking back. The grass appeared completely normal. No scorch marks, no broken fences, just the familiar pasture landscape. However, an inexplicable heaviness hung in the air, pressing down with an unsettling weight. Since their departure, I haven't seen them again. The strange lights have vanished too, but the sheep's reluctance remains. They continue to refuse settlement in that field, as if sensing something I cannot comprehend. I arrived at school early. An overnight fog had settled, leaving the front steps slick and wet. Two men stood by the flagpole, the type you'd only encounter in movies about classified information. Their shoes were so meticulously polished, they reflected the concrete surface like mirrors. One of them locked eyes with me, giving the impression he'd been anticipating my arrival. With his companion, he approached and stopped just a few feet away. One man bore a small scar on his cheek, and both carried a faint scent reminiscent of hospital-grade lemon cleaner. In those awkward moments, my brain did what brains typically do. I almost offered assistance. The taller man spoke first. "Good night. We're following up on an Did the sphere follow you again last night?" His words hung heavily in the air. Sphere. I realized I hadn't mentioned a sphere to anyone, only a light. My tongue felt thick. People always advise honesty, but in that moment being truthful seemed risky. The shorter man watched silently, observing without taking notes. His attention was so intense it made my skin crawl. I could have lied. I could have walked away. Instead, I wanted to gauge their reaction. So I described what I'd seen: a pale light, almost white, with a blue tinge, moving slowly and then suddenly sliding to the curb. No sound. My phone had gone fuzzy when I tried to capture it on camera. They exchanged a glance, seemingly reading from a predetermined script. "Thank you," the tall one said. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing the observation. Keep to usual channels. Report any physiological symptoms." "Report to whom?" I asked. No answer came. The shorter man added a final instruction. "If it follows again, maintain distance. Do not attempt to interact." Then they vanished as quickly as they had appeared. My days started blending together in a strange rhythm after those men's visit. School continued its usual routine, the janitor sweeping Miss Patel, moving through hallways, fluorescent lights humming with an unusual undertone. During lunch, TJ mentioned a traffic accident, and I feigned ignorance about the core. News. Later, he talked about a weird translator error in a feed. Something felt fundamentally wrong by the time the bell rang. That night, scattered thoughts rattled through my mind, leaving me restless and unable to sleep. One humid August evening near County Road 14, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Thick cornstalks towered around me, dark, and imposing. 3 soft white lights hovered low over the cornfield, not like planes or drones, but drifting and shifting subtly. Background noises started feeling like signals in the days following their visit. My phone's alarm blinked a minute early before correcting itself. The school security camera captured a morning clip where 2 frames suddenly showed only static before resuming normally. Maya, who sits behind me in history, seemed confused about conversations we'd had. Even though I'd mentioned something about a harvest 3 times that morning, facts appeared to be sliding in and out of place. A week later, on a rainy Thursday, I was called to the office. Expecting trouble for something trivial, I was surprised when the principal asked me to sit. The 2 men were there again, seated in folding chairs, as if they'd always been part of the scene. The taller one wore the same thin smile. "We just want to ensure you're coping," the principal said. They asked about headaches, sleep issues, dizziness. I mentioned feeling tired and jumpy, carefully avoiding any reference to that second night I'd gone out. My hands trembled when reaching for a pen. The men didn't ask about the photos on my phone or the route I'd walked. They simply nodded, left, and the principal advised me to visit the nurse if needed. I tried to move on. I ran errands for my mum, did homework, went to soccer practice. Normal things, but the light kept visiting my thoughts. After high school, a conversation left me unsettled. I woke to a car door. Sound and the uneasy feeling of being watched. The porch light was on, but no one was around when I pulled back the curtains. Silence enveloped the next morning, as if an entire chorus of birds had vanished. I never saw the men in person again, though twice I spotted a black sedan while walking. Hands in my pockets, I'd look up at the sky. Asphalt in the neighbor's grill hung in the air. No lights, no disturbance. Gus, Mrs. Sens, Gus, Mrs. Towles, Estens, and Ortega's dog trotted by, the dog's look suggesting I should be inside after dark. I went home and left the porch light on anyway. The night sky glowed a dull orange, stars barely visible against the distant town's illumination. I killed the headlights and parked, setting my camera on the hood to capture different exposures. Through the viewfinder, lights appeared sharper and more intense than with my naked eye. About a dozen photographs later, I noticed something strange. At one point, the lights mysteriously faded and reappeared in an entirely different position. Soft insect buzzing filled the background. I kept this experience to myself, knowing people would either elevate me to hero status or dismiss me as a liar. Life continued its steady rhythm. Classes changed, seasons sifted. Those lights never followed me after that first encounter. Perhaps they had achieved their unknown purpose, or perhaps they wanted nothing at all. The men in suits never returned, never sent a letter, never made contact. The school janitor continued sweeping floors. My phone's camera still captures grainy sky images. Sometimes the strange isn't about dramatic mythic moments, but about the subtle enrollment of small details afterward. A blank security file frame, a neighbor's dog that no longer barks in its usual way. These minor anomalies made me watch the sky longer than I probably should have. I now lock my door twice each night, a habit maintained ever since. Our lines buzzed faintly along the road, creating an atmosphere that was strange yet not threatening. I work at the feed store, nothing special. 2 nights before, while stacking wood behind the house, something caught my eye. 3 dull orange lights moving silently in a slow triangle across the sky. They paused briefly, then shot away faster than anything I'd ever seen. I kept this to myself. No neighbors, no co-workers knew. I didn't even take out my phone. It was a typical Friday night. The dog sat at my feet while I watched TV. Suddenly, 3 steady knocks echoed at the front door. Out here, nobody visits without calling first, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, 2 men stood on my porch. Their appearance was striking. Black suits, white shirts, and black ties hung like winter funeral attire. One was significantly taller than me, at least half a foot, while the other was slightly shorter. Their black shoes remained impeccably clean, despite the dusty ground. The lights had blinked out completely. I was preparing to head home when they appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. One moment I was adjusting camera settings, and the next they were simply there. "Evening, ma'am," the taller one said in a low, even voice. Their faces were pale but not sickly. Impossibly smooth skin made it hard to guess their age. Dark hair was parted precisely, cut short like in an old photograph. Neither seemed affected by the heat. I hadn't heard them approach. When I asked who they were, they stared silently for 5 full seconds. The shorter one repeated the exact same line, as if reading from a script. Their delivery was unnervingly uniform, no accent, no emotion. I gripped my camera tighter and declared I wouldn't hand it over. The taller one spoke, his lips barely moving. Simultaneously, they both smiled an unnatural smile that didn't reach their eyes. I stood at the edge of the cornfield, camera in hand, capturing the dim evening light. Suddenly, 2 men appeared, identical, with perfectly even teeth and a rehearsed, identical small smile. Without a word, they turned simultaneously and began walking down the road away from me, dressed in black suits with pale faces against the humid darkness. Their shoes crunched on the gravel for just a few seconds before falling silent. When I looked up, they had vanished. The road stretched long and straight with no possible turnoff. Shaking, I got into my car and locked the doors. My trembling hands dropped the camera onto the passenger seat. Driving back to town, the radio dissolved into static for about a mile. In my rearview mirror, I saw only an empty road. At home, I loaded the photos from my camera. At first, everything looked normal, dim shapes of the cornfield with faint, glowing lights. Halfway through the sequence, something changed. One shot revealed 2 men standing between the corn rows facing the camera. They were blurry but unmistakable, black suits among the corn stalks, looking straight at me. I hadn't seen anyone while shooting. No movement, no rustling leaves. In the next shot, they were gone. Just empty corn rows. 2 days later at the grocery store, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was my own photo, zoomed in on the 2 men's faces. No message, no caption. When I got home, the camera battery was dead, though it had been full the night before. The memory card was missing, and I knew I hadn't removed it. No introduction, no badge, no warmth. Good evening. May I come inside to ask a few questions? I was busy and asked what this was about. He tilted his head slightly, almost bird-like, and stated precisely that he was gathering information about aerial phenomena observed from my property on November 23rd at 6:37 p.m. The exactness of the time caught my attention immediately. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, not a single person, not even written it down anywhere. How do you know? I asked. He didn't respond, simply repeating, "We're gathering information." His appearance was unsettling. Old grey paper skin, thin, colourless lips, eyes incredibly dark. So dark that pupils and irises blended together, and he didn't blink, not once. I've replaced my lock since then and still go out on shoots, but never alone and never near that cornfield. Standing on my porch with the light buzzing overhead, a visitor began asking incredibly specific questions. 3 lights moving east, silent. When I gave these brief answers, he stared at me intensely with a blank, penetrating look, seeming to wait for me to elaborate or correct myself. I closed the door, my heart racing after this quick encounter that lasted maybe 3 minutes. In the living room with my dog nearby, I tried to calm down. Curiosity soon took over, and I decided to check where the mysterious visitor had gone. Maybe I could catch a license plate, but when I reopened the door, the porch was empty. The wet gravel driveway showed no trace, no car, no footprints. The drizzle continued. Later that evening, driving home on Route 9 past Miller's farm with its broken fence and square barn, I noticed something strange around 10:30. The rain had eased to a steady mist, making the road glisten. While glancing at the GPS, a pale light appeared over the field to my right, just above the crop rows. At first I thought it was a tractor light, but it hung motionless. No beams swept across the field, just a soft white glow like a porch lantern floating 10 or 12 feet off the ground. I did what most people do. I slowed down and stopped on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. The car went quiet except for the wipers. The light remained steady, no pulsing, making no sound. Back home, something felt off. My dog was whining softly, something he almost never does. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the road, scanning about a mile in both directions. With the drizzle and my porch light behind me, I should have been able to see a tail light, or at least a dark shape moving away. Nothing, just the sound of rain on leaves. An hour later, while making tea, I noticed something peculiar. When the man had been standing on my porch, I never heard rain on his coat. Mine was soaked after just a minute outside. He didn't have an umbrella, yet there were no beads of water on his shoulders. That night on a desolate road, something strange unfolded. What initially seemed like a possible farm equipment prank quickly transformed into something far more unsettling. 3 lights appeared in the sky, moving in ways no aircraft should, sliding sideways, about 30 yards before stopping completely. My radio erupted into static. First a faint buzz, then pure white noise drowned out the local station. The dashboard clock blinked to 0 before resetting to the correct time. When I tried taking pictures, my phone captured nothing, just smears where light should have been. As the lights vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, I drove on with slightly shaking hands. The field looked ordinary under my headlights, but the road felt unnervingly empty. No trucks, no other cars, not even crows on the fence. The world had shrunk to something tight and confined. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single piece of white paper with words typed precisely, "Thank you for your cooperation." I didn't keep the letter, I burned it. Strange encounters continued. The next morning, a black sedan appeared 2 houses down, parked under the sycamores. It looked pristine. No rust, no bumper stickers, with a license plate that didn't trigger recognition. Sometimes the driver's seat looked empty. Sometimes a shadowy figure occupied the passenger side. I didn't approach it. On the 3rd day's midpoint, I watched it pull away when heading to the hardware store. Its movement was unremarkable, just enough to turn the corner and disappear. I began noticing something odd while tracking its movement. It was maintaining a steady pace, half a block behind the delivery truck, and never exceeded the speed limit. When the truck turned, the sedan smoothly eased into the space left behind. I dismissed it as mere coincidence and went about my day. That evening, during the rain, I saw the car. Now, if a car slows down near my place, I find myself turning off the lights and waiting until it passes. My leather shoes remained polished and spotless. The next morning, I checked my old motion-activated security camera over the garage. It records short clips whenever someone approaches the driveway. There was nothing from that night. No car pulling in, no person walking up, no one leaving. Just the normal, empty driveway. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? That some guy in a suit knew something, appeared mysteriously, and left no trace. I'd stopped at the diner on Pine Street that night, the kind of place with coffee always brewing and a sign claiming the pie is fresh. Even at 2 a.m., I went inside for a hash brown. A black car had been appearing in strange places over the past 2 days. Near the library, in the church parking lot, each time I saw it, a tightness crept between my shoulder blades. I mentioned it to a work friend who laughed and joked about the UFO guy from last month. His laugh didn't reach his eyes. He suggested calling the police if I was sure, but I didn't follow up. That Friday night, unable to sit in my dark apartment staring at the street, I drove to the diner. Inside, fluorescent lights blazed almost too brightly. An old man ate beans at the counter. Ellie, the waitress who knew me by sight, brought coffee without asking. I took a booth by the window, watching the parking lot. The black car was there, parked just at the edge of the street lamp. Halfway through my sandwich, the doorbell chimed. 2 men in suits entered, not just dark jackets, but old-fashioned suits with flat lapels. White shirts, dark ties, immaculate shoes. They moved with purpose, taking brisk, economical steps. One had ash-colored hair combed straight back. The other had a crease at the corner of his mouth, like someone who enjoyed saying uncomfortable things. They came directly to my booth. "Excuse me," the taller one said flatly. "Are you feeling well since the event?" For a moment I thought he was joking. "What event?" I responded, as if I didn't know what he meant. I hadn't told anyone about the lights. Not even Ellie. The atmosphere changed as they approached. One was tall, with unnervingly calm, unblinking eyes. The other blinked, but it seemed calculated. A faint scent of aftershave and rain surrounded them, and the air grew colder. I laughed nervously, that uncomfortable chuckle people make when uncertainty takes hold. "The lights over Miller's Field," I whispered. I didn't elaborate. Saying it out loud might make it real. The diner had fallen completely silent. An old man's fork hung suspended midair. Ellie stared down at the register, her order pad forgotten. 2 men stood near my table, their presence commanding and unnervingly precise. The tall one spoke first, his words clipped and methodical. Continue your routine. Avoid sharing details. Keep your frequency normal. We will monitor. When I asked about monitoring, my own voice sounded strange even to my ears. The shorter man placed a finger on the table, marking an invisible boundary. We are checking for adverse effects, he said. You reported no auditory disturbances. They glanced at me, then simultaneously tilted their heads at the exact same angle. Their smiles, the tall one's smile that didn't reach his eyes, the shorter one's expression precisely matching, were identical. I haven't said anything, I said sharply. Good, they responded in unison. The tall one added, keep to your schedule. Maintain social contacts. Do not conduct experiments. The words hung heavily. I couldn't remember planning any experiments. As a courier, I wasn't someone who set up cameras in fields. Their language was clinical, like a nurse checking medication compliance. These weren't police or local officials. This wasn't a routine checkup. Around me, the diner's atmosphere had transformed. The old man lowered his fork. A woman by the pie case turned pale. A young cook in a baseball cap concentrated intensely on flipping eggs, as if his focus could make these strange men vanish. They stood there for maybe 2 minutes before turning and walking to the door with the same slow, economical pace. Through the rain-streaked car, headlights off, glass tinted, they stepped into the mist and reached the vehicle in just a few strides. The tall one opened the door, and then they were gone. The black car had barely left when I started replaying everything that happened. 2 men, no introductions, just a procedural interaction that felt more like closing a file than a confrontation. A waitress approached, her voice slightly too bright. I left a $10 bill on the table and walked out without finishing my coffee. Outside, rain was falling under streetlights. The men weren't violent, and they weren't threatening in the way someone with a weapon might be. I thought about their cryptic words and the strange instruction to avoid sharing details. That night, every light in my apartment stayed on. I stared at the door, half expecting a soft knock, or the squeak of tires. The water by my bed tasted metallic. Sleep came in fragments. I started waking earlier than usual. Here's the rewritten version. Something has changed. I can't shake that feeling. When the black car appears, my world shrinks to the edge of a curtain. Their check-ins are mechanical, procedural, no warmth, just pure routine. I sit in the diner, eating a late sandwich alone. Nobody asks about my health anymore. The men don't need to threaten me. Their presence speaks volumes. I've glimpsed them at a gas station, reflected in pumped glass, black suits, pale faces moving past. Aaron, who writes obituaries and turns everything into a joke, heard my story. He suggested ignoring it, treating it like a weird couple of nights. Strangely, his lack of detailed questions made me share more. The next day, he recommended writing everything down. So I did. Longhand in a notebook now sitting on my kitchen table, pages filled with timestamps, synchronized smiles, details about the car, the rain, the diner's coffee smell. I keep driving past Miller's Field, parking on the shoulder, staring into darkness. I'm searching for that light again, wanting proof, wanting to explain this in one coherent sentence. Daylight reveals a benign landscape, neat cornrows, a broken fence I've meant to report. But at dusk, there's sometimes an unexplainable glow on the horizon. Something my camera can't capture. When I lock my front door at night, I do it twice. I check the people repeatedly. Midnight found me posting a photo from the harbor road, tide low and quiet, 3 lights hung over the horizon, nutwater hanging like delicate lamps above the bay. I'd stopped my car, climbed the break wall, and snapped a few shots with my phone. What my screen showed was clearer than what my eyes could see. 3 white dots forming an uneven triangle, sometimes wobbling, sometimes steady. My upload to the town's Facebook group was simple. We had lights over the bay. Anyone else seeing this? The group typically buzzed with mundane updates. Crab recipes and lost dog notices. I didn't expect much response. Distant gull sounds and harbor hums seeped through my cracked window as I drifted off to sleep. The morning was routine until they appeared. 2 men in black suits stood at my service counter, their movements precise and calculated. Clean cut, short hair, one tall with a fade, the other shorter with a narrow jaw. They didn't order. They didn't speak, just two dark silhouettes amid the soft grey fog. From the start, something felt off. Their stance was unnatural, shoulders rigid, heels set, staring directly at me without blinking. I initially thought they were intensely examining the pastry case, but the taller one's head tilted slightly, tracking me like a predator watching potential prey. He wasn't chewing, wasn't breathing heavily. He simply existed. Around me, the cafe behaved strangely. Regulars acted as if nothing unusual was happening. Pete, who always orders his sausage and egg at 9:30, would look up and smile normally. A woman with a stroller scrolled through her phone nearby, then left without incident. Despite the busy morning rush, the register line seemed unusually quiet. My hands trembled slightly as I wiped the counter, hyper-aware of these two motionless figures. They carried themselves with an unmistakable authority, shoulders forward, chins set, no newspapers read, no casual movements, just their precise, choreographed presence. At least 15 minutes passed. People would glance over, then return to their coffees. I continued making sandwiches and taking payments, unable to shake the tension. Eventually I managed a simple question. "Can I help you fellas with anything?" The shorter one turned his head marginally, almost imperceptibly. No real facial movement, no sound. The taller one nodded. He answered everything systematically, his words precise and automatic. Two men had been watching me intently without blinking, and I responded reflexively to their questions. The shorter man went straight to the point. He asked about my sleep, potential headaches, hearing changes, and disrupted appetite. His words made the coffee in my hand feel suddenly sharp and acidic. I realized I hadn't shared these experiences with anyone. Not my mother, not my boss, not even the online group where I'd half-heartedly posted a few pictures about some strange lights. When I described seeing lights over the bay and photographing them, I felt uncomfortably close to making a full confession. They listened impassively. The taller one gave clear instructions: continue routine, avoid sharing details. Consult your physician if symptoms worsen. Before leaving, he placed a folded newspaper on the counter between us, leaving behind a small rectangle of embossed ink that looked like a barcode. The diner fell into that distinct silence that accompanies significant conversations. A tray clattered in the background, breaking the momentary quiet before silence reasserted itself. The two men straightened, signaling their imminent departure. They vanished as mysteriously as they'd arrived, without touching the door, without drawing attention. Nights continued to flicker over the bay, and something felt off. People moved in their usual patterns at the cafe, but the atmosphere remained strange. Two men had been standing by the counter earlier. Oh, no camera footage captured them clearly. In my photographs, I'd noticed something peculiar. My favorite shot of three lights over the water revealed two dark shapes just beyond the shoreline, almost like telephone poles. Zooming in showed two figures exactly where the men had been that morning. One taller with hands forward, the other shorter with a tilted head. When I mentioned this to others at the cafe, reactions varied wildly. The hat-wearing man claimed he'd seen nothing. Ellie at the register, who'd worked mornings for 6 years, suggested I might be overtired. "You've got a lot going on," she said softly. Pete, distracted on his phone, thought I was just jumpy. The woman with the stroller recalled no encounter. Someone from the town's Facebook group even sent a private message. "Here's the rewritten text." My world started shifting after that night at the cafe. A photo I'd taken sparked unexpected attention. Harbor Patrol began investigating reports about strange lights by midday, but I brushed it off, continuing to make sandwiches and maintain normalcy. The night brought a clearing sky and a late bus ride home. Back at my apartment, my roommate's friends were loud, yet something felt unsettling. Around 2 a.m., I discovered the kitchen dark and my phone lighting up with a mysterious notification. An unrecognizable user sent me the photo I'd taken of three lights time-stamped before my original post. No username, no explanation. A dull rectangle pressed into the paper caught my eye, hinting at something deeper. Days passed with growing anticipation. I drove past the harbor, scanning the water and sky for any unusual signs. Black cars would randomly appear, adding layers to the growing mystery. My phone would glitch, freezing the camera app and showing strange still images. At the cafe, the security system logged a brief 10-second fault, where the video feed pixelated without audio. We replaced the cable, but the strangeness persisted. When I mentioned the lights, people quickly changed the subject, laughing about late-night lighthouse sightings. The Facebook thread vanished. A moderator's private message explained posts sometimes get flagged. No one else remembered the two women I'd seen in the shop. Wall camera footage showed only ordinary movements, people talking steaming milk. My photo of two women in black seemed to exist only in my memory. I started sleeping with lights on, a small act of perceived safety. The women never returned. Sporadic light reports over the bay continued for weeks before fading into silence. My photos remained, looking like an unexplained trick of perception. I stopped sharing the story, telling my roommate a toned-down version. Just a weird morning, I'd say. Yet late at night, while washing dishes, I'd find myself watching the street long after everyone slept. When fog rolled in from the water, I'd step outside, breathing the cold, wondering. I kept the photo on my phone, occasionally opening it and staring at the background until the image blurs, hoping Samantha would step out of the grey. The women had lingered by the counter, asked their questions without really asking, and left as if they had never been here at all. Internally, something was different. I knew the shape like you know the shape of a bruise. It wasn't obvious at first, but you can't unknow it. Nothing changed outwardly. I went back to work pouring coffee, while my manager joked that maybe the city needed me to be their official weather reporter. No knock at my door, no late-night visits from suits, just the regular world. I checked the harbour, damp and light. That July night, heat hung thick and heavy across my grandparents' land, 3 fields with an old red barn and a row of sagging cottonwoods. Claire and I stood at the kitchen window, desperate for a hint of breeze. Rex, our lab, wandered near the back porch as I lit the last mosquito coil. Suddenly, the henhouse went completely silent. At first, I suspected a fox might be prowling, but then something stranger happened. Every single bird had frozen like someone hit pause on a video. A slow light began moving across the field, not like an airplane or strobe, but a single pale disc hovering low, carefully watching against the cottonwoods. I could tell it was about the height of telephone poles. It drifted deliberately from the east hedgerow toward the pond, gliding without a sound. Only a faint change in the grass and a cool glow, sliding past like a painter's torch, revealed its movement. Instinctively, I grabbed my camera. The photos were useless, just washed-out dots against blackness. Claire came out in her slippers, leaned on my shoulder and muttered, "What the hell?" Rex sat by the fence, unusually calm, watching with the focused attention dogs get when spotting a kite. We observed the Tesla light drift past the pond and over the woodlot, then vanish into darkness like a light being tucked into someone's pocket. We didn't call anyone who would believe us. The sheriff would probably laugh us off. Strange things kept happening afterward. The next morning, my pickup's battery was dead, though I'd left no lights on. At noon, my radio, note how strange stillness had settled over Gravel Farm Drive that afternoon. The game camera by the pond held a disquieting secret. 6 seconds of black, then static, then 6 more seconds of black, no image at all. The timestamp read 2 a.m., which didn't quite align with when the hens went quiet or when the light had passed. Flair's watch lost 5 minutes, then mysteriously reappeared an hour later. The hens huddled tightly along the coop, refusing to go near the east hedge. Weather can turn thick and still, creating conditions where odd things seem to happen almost naturally. Claire had mentioned a dream about voices in the grass, laughing it off over coffee, while keeping her purse close. Grandma Ellen, who's lived here 50 years, just shook her head when we told her about the day's events. An unexpected visitor arrived, looking more downtown office than farmland. When I opened the door, wiping my hands on a towel, he spoke directly. "Evening. I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a glass of water before we discuss last night?" Something felt strange about how he spoke, as if our discussion was anticipated. Behind me, Claire watched from the kitchen island. Grandma Ellen rocked in her chair, knitting needles clicking softly. The dog gave a single sharp bark. His unusual face caught my attention first. Eyes an indeterminate color, not quite brown, not quite gray, and he didn't blink while speaking. I handed him water from the tap, which he took politely. His fingers wrapped around the glass with practiced precision, though he never actually drank. When I realized this, I felt oddly foolish. "You okay?" I asked. He set the glass down and responded in a precise, economical voice. Now, would you describe what you observed? No notepad, no phone, no direct requests, just patient waiting. So I told him everything, the pale disc hovering over the pond, how it slid into the trees and vanished, how the fence had frozen, Rex sitting watching the camera by the post, capturing only a blank clip. At 2:12 a.m. Claire mentioned her watch losing time. Grandma Ellen spoke of her dream. He nodded after each detail, as if cataloguing information in some internal system. We didn't talk much about the light. Claire put away dishes mechanically, pausing midway to rub her palms together, a telltale sign she was trying to stop thinking about something. Maybe we should call somebody, she said, just to have it on record. I agreed we would handle it. The man moved between trees like someone navigating a familiar hallway, balancing 2 fingers on the glass rim as he walked off the porch, down the drive, through the next gate toward the pond. Within 30 yards, the light through the leaves completely absorbed him. He vanished. We remained motionless. Claire's dish towel dropped. Grandma's knitting slipped from her hands. Rex flattened his ears and whined softly. The untouched glass sat on the portrait. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Corn shimmered. Crickets awakened. Darkness settled. Bear went to get a glass and poured it down the sink. Nothing remained. No drop spilled or evaporated as might happen with an open container on a breezy summer day. The glass looked untouched, dry and cool. When I ran my fingers inside, no trace of water existed. No hint of mineral rings on the edges. Walking the path to the gate revealed no disturbance. The grass stood undisturbed with no footprints suggesting anyone had been here. That night we sat with closed windows and the porch light on, sleep coming fitfully. We knew farms, knew coyotes and storms, understood the small dangers that roam fields. But this felt different. Mornings brought strange occurrences. The coupe door would be shut, though I'd left it open. My pickup's tailgate would be locked when I'd left it down. At noon, the shop radio cut to static for 2 seconds, regardless of station. Grandma Ellen started leaving her porch light on until I asked her to stop. I kept the hens close to the yard and let Bren sleep better. The suited man never returned. No car ever parked on the road that might match him or his description. The glass remained suspicious until I finally tucked it away in the cupboard with other dishes, trying to treat it like something ordinary. Sometimes I look at that cupboard and think of frozen hens, of a quiet field where a single light moved like a hand sweeping velvet, but how the man's tongue didn't move when he spoke, of how he left a full glass of water untouched. I don't call this an event or a visitation. I'm not spinning tales about UFOs or hidden worlds. The story begins with a shared experience of mystery. Seasons pass with hens pecking near the hedge, and some nights I still glance at the pond. I was on the roadside, engine running, when the first car passed, seemingly oblivious. Near midnight, the rain had softened. White lines and diner signs were my only companions as I drove down a long stretch of highway, returning from a job in the next county. Suddenly, my headlights transformed from a normal dim yellow to a bright blue. Other drivers continued speeding past, unaffected. To the east, a light caught my attention. At first, it looked like a construction sign, but something felt different. Hovering about 100 feet above the guardrail, it remained motionless and soft, like an abandoned lamp suspended in midair. Shaking, I pulled over and killed the engine. Rain hissed softly on the hood while my phone showed no signal. I didn't attempt to film the scene. That would have felt like admitting fear. Instead, I watched. Cars continued passing beneath the light, close enough to flag down, but nobody stopped. It seemed as if vehicles were moving around something invisible unnoticed. The light was a clean disc in a pale color I couldn't immediately categorize. Later, when I tried describing it in my phone's notes, soft white with a blue wash felt inadequate. The radio suddenly erupted into static, not a gradual fade, but an abrupt white roar as if disconnected from any rational source. My dashboard clock blinked 0 momentarily before resetting, and the digital form monitor flickered 2 days before returning to normal. A truck passed 2 lanes away. The driver stared straight ahead, mouth moving, possibly speaking to a passenger. He didn't slow down. The light then slid sideways, not sharply, but like an object being gently nudged across a surface. The air felt different, not from wind or pressure, but as if someone had drawn an invisible curtain around me. I oddly recalled a pot of coffee left on a burner, how its aroma lingers and fills a space. I pulled up to the pump, needing gas and a moment to process what I'd just witnessed. This is how mysteries find us. Unexpected, unexplained, leaving us with more questions than answers. No coffee after a strange night on the highway. The gas station felt like my only shelter from the eerie stillness. Two men stood at the counter, completely out of place, their dark suits and polished shoes looking like they had stepped out of a downtown office, not a roadside stop. Marco, a kid I knew from a previous job, waved me toward Pump 3. Inside the convenience store, diesel and peppermint gum hung in the air under harsh fluorescent lights. One man was tall with a square jaw, the other shorter. Two men stood by the cooler unnaturally still. Their presence felt odd. When the doorbell rang, they turned in perfect synchronization. I noticed small details, a slightly misaligned tie on the taller man, a tiny scuff on the shorter man's right shoe. Their gaze locked onto me. After my strained night on the highway, I felt like prey. "Sir," the tall one spoke, his voice completely neutral. "You were on Route 47 earlier this evening, were you not?" It wasn't really a question. Something about how he knew the route made me uneasy. I nodded. "Headed back from the mill," he continued. "Did you observe any aerial lights approximately 8 miles east of the Star Bridge?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "I did. Earlier driving home I'd been cautious. The highway had shown me something strange, a light that winked out instantly like a photograph snatched from the sky. No sound followed, no echo, just darkness with distant truck-tail lights ghosting across my dashboard." The shorter man studied his hands, then looked up with a gaze that made me read his expression twice. It wasn't anger or friendliness, just pure puzzlement. "Describe the exact color of the lights," he demanded. "Colors can be tricky, especially from a nighttime encounter." I thought about how the light appeared pale like the inside of an overcast day, but with a coolness that made its edges shift toward blue. When I blinked, I described it precisely. A soft white with a blue wash. More blue than halogen, yet softer than neon. Like the blue you'd see in a pale winter window, clean but not electric. Their exchange was lightning quick. A subtle tightening at the corner of the taller man's mouth. The shorter one tilting his head as if mishearing something. The moment lasted less than a second, but felt pivotal. Now he stared at me, his face going blank. For the first time, our eyes fully met, and I caught a glimpse of confusion. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, causing Marco at the register to look up from bagging chips. They left exactly as they'd arrived through the glass door, buying nothing, not even touching the pumps. Walking into the rain, they moved like men with a precise destination. I watched them go, expecting them to enter a car, but no vehicle sat in the station lot. For a moment, I imagined they ducked behind a truck, but no vehicle could hide two grown men without a sound. I paid for my coffee with cash. My card felt too slow. The small glitches began surfacing after that moment at the gas station. My iPhone would randomly flash a temporary loss of carrier while on hold. The electrical hum in the house took on a soft skip. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, staring out the window for 6 minutes, with no recollection of what had captured my thoughts. Marco didn't ask for a receipt when we first spoke about it. Outside, the rain-intensified streetlights blew me into hallows as I fumbled with my car keys. The coffee's aroma filled the car while I watched the station's edge. A black sedan rolled slowly past the pump islands and eased down a side street, its headlights low and radio at a polite volume. Outwardly, life continued normally. I worked, drove county roads, mowed the yard, but something inside felt quieter. These little skips made me watch the edge of my life carefully. For 3 mornings after the encounter, I kept replaying the color question in my head. It was a logically odd thing to ask. People who study lights might want exit data or wavelengths, but an anonymous citizen inquiring about a shade of blue, that's something a journalist might bring up, not two men in suits at a gas station. I shared the story with Marco the next time I went for gas, partly to hear it out loud and check my memory against his recollection. He shrugged like the sensible city kid he was, mentioning he'd seen a car pull through the lot that night black and clean, but hadn't thought much of it. He didn't remember two men at the counter, Maybe they were just some weirdos. Later, we went to Clear Pond for a weekend trip. Me, Alex, Maya, Brent, Lena, and Omar set up a couple of tents on the ridge above the water and built a fire pit down by the shore. It had rained in the afternoon, and then the clouds thinned enough to reveal that bright, hard summer sky that comes with low humidity. We'd eaten hot dogs, thrown a frisbee that kept getting blown off course, and then sat in a ring around the fire with our headlamp beams off, just listening. Around 11 o'clock, when the bugs had gone quiet and Brent was telling a story about a raccoon in his neighbor's trash, things felt a little smaller and slower than usual. You notice the cadence of the night when you're not in a city. The frogs across the water had their own rhythm. The fire crackled. Then Maya, her face turned toward the lake. She leaned back on her elbows and pointed out something unusual. At first, I thought she meant the moon, but this was different. About 100 yards out over the pond, 3 pale lights hung maybe 20 feet above the surface, moving together slowly. It looked like someone might be walking lanterns across the water on cables, except there was no boat, no rope, no sound. They drifted a little, paused, then slid sideways in perfect unison. A week later, I found a small folded scrap of paper on a pickup truck's bumper in the parking lot. It was a gas station receipt printed at 11:43 p.m., the exact time of the lights. Someone had neatly written a color and the letter B on the back. I tucked the paper into my pocket and drove home. I thought about telling someone, but each time I tried, it felt like private gossip. The county office, the local paper, a blog, nothing seemed right. When I finally told my friend Cassia, she listened carefully. She's a nurse, but even she seemed intrigued. "You were precise. Keep it that way," she said. Our camping trip changed after that night. 5 of us sat around the fire, marshmallow sticks forgotten, staring at something unexplainable. Lights flickered in the distance, unlike anything we'd seen before. The highway continued its steady traffic, indifferent to our confusion. Marco kept the coffee warm while we tried to make sense of what we'd witnessed. Nina suggested drone hobbyists from nearby campers, but none of our theories fit. The lights behaved strangely, not flickering like LEDs or blinking like navigation markers. More peculiar was how undisturbed the surrounding nature remained. Frogs kept up their chorus. Ducks didn't fly. Not a single wave stirred. After 20 minutes, the lights faded as if someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. We lingered, half expecting them to reappear. Conversation dissolved into hesitant fragments. Exhaustion crept in, and we retreated to our tents. Night fell restlessly, with our usual routine disrupted by an unsettling atmosphere. Teeth brushing, boat launch alarms, and cooler checks gave way to fitful sleep. Lena stirred once, certain of movement around our perimeter. A headlamp revealed nothing. Morning arrived with nervous laughter about potentially sharing a mysterious lights over Clear Pond story with the local paper. Breakfast and coffee seemed more urgent. While packing an unmarked, dark sedan appeared just after sunrise, something felt off. People don't typically arrive at 8 o'clock to observe a campsite. 2 men in suits emerged, not cheap city attire, but formal and crisp, with neat ties and clean shoes. They approached slowly, deliberately. "Morning," said the taller man in a flat, neutral tone. Their arrival triggered a memory I'd eventually discard like an old receipt forgotten in a glove compartment. This memory hung differently, less like a movie, more like a small floor tile slightly out of place that catches your eye when entering a room. Their reaction surprised me not through my words, but through an inexplicable disconnect. When I described the blue as a pale, clean winter blue, their brief confusion felt like a mismatched key. No threat, no alarm, just the expression of a script unexpectedly breaking on the wrong page. They never returned. The station remained open. Highway traffic continued uninterrupted. I captured a few pictures on my phone, just white smears on the camera, yet the screen revealed something that made the experience feel more tangible. With unusual stillness, they approached us, their demeanor precise and unnerving. No phones, no notepads, just intense observation. Describe exactly what you saw, they instructed, cutting off potential explanations. We complied, detailing our encounter meticulously. 3 lights hovering about 20 feet above water, moving together silently. No sound, no typical explanation. Their questions probed specific details. Electronics behaved strangely during the event. Rent heard a high-pitched ringing. Lena's phone switched on and off while attempting to photograph the lights. Maya's pocket compass spun erratically. Our camera photos were smudged dots. Video files glitchy and distorted. To each revelation, they nodded silently. When the encounter happened, we were at the campsite. 2 men approached us, one shorter, one taller. Something felt immediately strange. When asked about their names, the shorter man responded that names weren't necessary. His companion added coldly that they had other identifiers, with a tiny smile that didn't reach his eyes. Their appearance was unsettling. Their skin seemed untouched by wind, and their dark eyes didn't blink normally. I whispered these observations to Omar, who acknowledged them reluctantly. They seemed particularly interested in who else knew about our observation. I posted one photo on a local community page, and Lena had mentioned it to someone. Their interest felt carefully calculated. Without warning, they turned and walked directly into the woods from the path. Their movement was impossibly smooth, as if moving through a hallway. We watched, stunned, as the morning light seemed to absorb their figures completely. They vanished through the trees, leaving no trace, no rustling, leaves, no broken branches, just a sudden absence. Lena broke our shocked silence, asking where they'd gone. We realized they had completely disappeared. The light through the pines looked unchanged, as if they had never existed. Following procedure, we called the ranger, but he was out checking a damage sign and didn't arrive for 40 minutes. When he finally came and we described the encounter, he nodded slowly, took our names, and made a note in his book. Later, when he drove to check the trail cameras, there was nothing, no record, no evidence of the mysterious visitors. The empty grassy path and tree stretch looked completely still. Our car stood alone at the camp entrance, with no other vehicles in sight. No footprints marked the soft ground where the men had been, and the mud near the boat launch, or only our tracks. We packed up faster than planned. Nobody felt like fishing or swimming after that strange encounter. Brent said the air seemed too thin, like you suddenly became aware of your own breathing. Maya laughed at small jokes that weren't really funny. Her face betrayed an underlying tension we all felt. At the ranger station, 2 strangers in black suits continued their matter-of-fact questioning. The shorter man requested our names, waiting expectantly without reaching for any recording device. We introduced ourselves, Maya, Bren, Lena, and spoke about the entire encounter. Moma drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lena was pale, rubbing her eyes and muttering about how the man's coffee-colored eyes made her skin crawl. We didn't stop until we passed the town signs, the highway swallowing the tires. Back home, I reviewed the photos again. One picture I thought captured the lights best, showed a thin grey line near the terrain. A brief glimpse of the taller man's shoulder blown up revealed just grainy shadows. Nothing definitive. Mia's phone had a similar smudge. Ren mentioned his camera had corrupted the last 2 files. Lenena claimed her compass had spun oddly for 15 minutes after leaving the site. No knowing what to make of it, I posted in the local group thread using our real names. Then we returned to our normal lives after that day. Work, apartments, grocery stores, bus stops. The 2 men who asked precise questions had simply walked into the trees and vanished without leaving any trace. No official call came, and no local police responded. The ranger from the Division of Natural Lands had dropped off a business card saying he'd check county dispatch about any missing person reports. People were talking, wanting an official record instead of rumors. Some reported seeing strange lights in the days before. Others suggested LED kites, and one comment warned people like us against camping alone. A woman who writes a bird-watching column had asked to interview us but never followed up. I've been hiking the Ridgeway Trail since childhood, knowing exactly when to put the phone away and when to take it out. This was August, with that hot dusk, where the air hangs like a blanket and bugs make a steady shush in the leaves. Work had run over, so I started late and was above the 3rd switchback when something appeared. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe sunlight dragging off the stream surface, or a guy with a flashlight in bad timing, but it was higher than the tree line. Definitely not a reflection. Silver, perhaps 20 to 30 feet, across flattened on the bottom like a coin suspended on its edge. I moved slowly and deliberately, no jerks, no wings, and absolutely no sound. Birds kept flying past without spooks. The air remained unchanged. I filmed it because I couldn't not. My hand was slightly shaky, aware I might later need to defend this as not being a hallucination. The pay clip didn't capture much, just the usual grainy darkness, the silver smear. But when I replayed it, the motion looked strange. The object slid left, paused, then drifted. Behind the ridgeline, I stayed up for a long time, sweating and thinking. Sleep eluded me that night. I couldn't post the clip and told myself I'd process it later, but rest never came. At work, Bren mentioned the incident twice, yet his colleagues dismissed it with indifferent shrugs. On my laptop, I studied the footage, acutely aware that digital recordings can be unreliable. Cameras crop and compress images, and phone cameras especially struggle in low-light conditions. I find myself repeatedly opening the folder with those photos, zooming in on the blurry smear, attempting to steady it into a recognizable form. Something keeps drawing me back, despite telling myself not to make anything of it. 2 nights after my hike, a black sedan appeared on the curb across from my house. The location matters. I live on a narrow lane where overnight parking is uncommon, making the vehicle's presence immediately suspicious. An older model car, yet in near-perfect condition, sat with heavily tinted windows, its headlights off, and engine silent. At precisely 2:13 a.m., which I verified on my phone, the vehicle remained motionless. The lane carried scents of cut grass and warm asphalt. My dog Gus, typically sound asleep, unexpectedly rose and padded to the door. He sat silently, staring out the window in a way that felt like a warning. Given Gus isn't skittish, his behavior seemed significant. When the car finally left, it moved slowly and quietly, rolling away and disappearing at the first intersection as if deliberately avoiding attention. For a week, the sedan appeared at the same time and place, like a precise ritual. I attempted to catch someone emerging, even stepping into the backyard in shorts and flip-flops, calling out toward the lane. My voice sounded silly against the quiet stillness. Strange incidents began accumulating. My war clock slipped a minute forward, which I initially dismissed. My bedside alarm blinked 2:13 a.m., and even when turned off, it would correct itself when nudged. These tiny occurrences made me observe my surroundings differently. Searching windows for hidden scenes, men in suits arrived, polite and methodical. They asked us to recount observations without writing anything down, stating names weren't necessary. Then they walked into the woods and simply vanished from view. That's what happened. I drove home and called the number on the Resi's card, hoping something might have turned up. I left a message, but they never returned my call. Ben, who runs the outdoor blog I write for, is a close friend who always responds with inside jokes only we understand. Some nights, I'd sit in my car with the engine running and the radio low, watching and waiting. I'd set up strategies to understand the unnerving routine developing around me. A cheap motion camera aimed at the street went up on the porch, and I'd leave the hallway light on with blinds open. Each night brought new theories. Maybe it belonged to a co-worker's friend. Perhaps someone was monitoring potential car thieves. The human brain loves finding patterns, and I was caught in one. Ben wanted the video clip, believing he could enhance the image with special filters. I was reluctant to share what felt like my private evidence, something I might need to prove my experience someday. I made copies, sliding one into the top drawer's SD card. Every time I think of those 2 men turning toward the pines and vanishing, I find myself checking the door twice before bed. My old analog watch sat meticulously synchronized by the wall clock. On the 8th night, something changed. The car stayed until 3:01 a.m., sending a small adrenaline kick through me. At 3:02 it turned down the block and stopped directly across from my house. I couldn't wait any longer. With keys and flashlight in hand, I went outside. Gus, my dog, followed but stopped at the doorway. Not a confrontational type. The car's windows were black, its license plate seemingly ordinary. But when my flashlight hit it, the digits blurred into indistinct shapes. Feeling exposed, I called out, "Hey." With forced assertiveness, silence hung in the air. Then, with mechanical precision, the passenger window lowered slightly. A hand emerged, tapping the driver's side glass, a gesture so calculated it seemed almost rhythmic. No sound, no movement, just the car idling with an unnerving radioactive patience. I stood waiting for some human reaction, for footsteps, for a phone's buzz. Nothing came. The car's interior was a dark cave around me. For the next 2 days, the vehicle remained parked with Gus silently watching from the window without making a sound. Ben arrived the following weekend, bringing large binoculars and a sense of curiosity. He spent an afternoon on my roof, advising me to stay calm if I felt followed. That night, I spotted the sedan again and called 911. The dispatcher explained that without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. I felt both ridiculous and strangely safe enough to be dismissed. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. My phone, normally charging perfectly on the nightstand, now displayed only a black screen. A black rectangle about a meter wide appeared on an empty street, exactly where a car had been. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed nothing unusual. In one instant, the street existed. The next, a column of emptiness appeared. Then the street returned. The timestamps were peculiar. The camera logged the clip at 21:37, and the garage DVR displayed a similar pattern. A brief grey interruption before normal resumed. Attempting to play the missing fragment on my laptop caused the media player to stall completely. A week later, I trailed the car from the intersection, keeping a steady 50-yard distance. My goal was simple: catch a glimpse of the license plate. The vehicle moved with unsettling consistency, never adjusting its speed. We passed stoplights, and at the second one, something extraordinary occurred. The car eased forward and then vanished without hesitation. The road ahead stood completely empty, with the GPS showing a solid line. I checked my mirror. No brake lights. I honked like an idiot for a moment. Suddenly, the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb, as if waiting for me to notice something specific. I was approaching a moment of raw honesty. This wasn't random. No ordinary prankster could orchestrate something like this. Then, they came to the door. It was a Tuesday. Rain fell like the world was being thoroughly rinsed. Gus wagged his tail but remained silent when the knock came. The digital clock on my microwave flickered awake at 2:13 a.m., right as the knocking started. 3 precise, measured raps on the front step. When I opened the door, 2 men stood in the darkness, their black umbrellas folded like swords, long black coats draped over well-tailored suits. They were nothing like typical late-night visitors. Clean shoes, simple faces, neither young nor old, with neutral expressions that made their eyes seem just a bit too intent. "Good evening," said the taller one, sounding like a radio announcer without warmth. "We are here to speak about your footage." My heart seized. I hadn't told anyone. I'd filmed something. The SD card sat in my top drawer, and suddenly I felt sick. Locked in a tense negotiation with 2 strangers on my porch, I confronted them about their sudden appearance. They spread their hands in what seemed almost like a conciliatory gesture. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The shorter man spoke slowly. "We are with the office. We need to review the original file." When I started to ask how they knew, I caught myself. "We are not here to make trouble," the taller one said casually, as if discussing the weather. I told them I didn't want anyone going through my stuff and demanded they show a badge if they were law enforcement. They exchanged a look, that unspoken communication that passes between people who understand each other. "We are not law enforcement in the familiar sense," the taller one added. The shorter man asked about auditory disturbances. My throat tightened as I slowly replied, "No." They smiled simultaneously, a practiced gesture that felt rehearsed. "Thank you for your cooperation," the taller one said. The shorter man nodded, tilting his head like someone checking off an item on a list. Then they turned and walked away, stepping off the porch into the rainy darkness. No car waited. They simply vanished like figures falling behind heavy curtains. For a while, the nights rearranged themselves around that precise moment. I still check the trees when the wind dies down. Some nights I wake up and sit with my phone watching time change. Life continued. I slept. I went to work. I hiked the ridgeway when weather permitted. Then Eric called just after midnight, his voice carrying a nervous edge I'd rarely heard before. "Dude, what the hell did you send me?" I was half asleep, drifting between dreams and waking. I told him I hadn't sent anything, but he insisted I'd texted a picture minutes ago. My messages app showed nothing. Ben had run the file through filters, but it never revealed more than a silver smear. He'd warned me not to post it after a reporter called asking about the source of outdoor phenomena. He brushed the man off, working with freelance contacts. After those two men came asking for the file, things returned to normal. Gus stopped pacing by the window at 213. The porch camera remained quiet. Sometimes I pull out the clip and stare at that silver smear, wondering what those men wanted. The street looked exactly as it always had, quiet and unchanging. A man in black had stood on my porch saying little beyond needing to review an original file. They left everything untouched, precisely where it had been on a small, private, unsettled shelf of my life. Gus has become someone who notices small things differently now. A lighter sleeper. The street was the same rain stretcher it had been for years. The last night a car pulled up, I handed over an SD card. Days later, I told him the whole messy, abridged story. He asked to keep a copy, showed me the odd black rectangle. The car never came back. Eric's voice sounded strange when he first mentioned the photo, something about a glowing shape hanging over the edge of my neighborhood. I denied sending anything, but he insisted it came from my number. I don't send photos. My last message to him was just a meme about our fantasy league from 2 days ago. Describe what you're looking at right now, he said suddenly. My bedroom was dark, curtains closed. My phone was in my hand when I swiped through my gallery. Nothing new appeared. The last picture was from a previous weekend. Eric exhaled sharply and said he'd sent the image back to me. The incoming photo made my stomach drop. It looked like the edge of my street, with pine and bare oak silhouettes. Just above the tree line, a glowing shape, not bright like a spotlight, but hazed like a jellyfish, alive from within. The glow seemed to blend with the night, creating an indistinct boundary. Where did you get this? I whispered. From you? Eric responded. It literally says it's from you. Neither of us spoke for a moment. He suggested my phone might have been hacked, but his words lacked conviction. I slid out of bed and crossed to the window, peeking through thin bars of street light leaking past curtains. The street was empty, block's end dark and still. When I asked Eric to send a screenshot of his messages, he complied. The IMs matched the moment of his call, showing my name and the mysterious photo. I'm coming over, he said abruptly. I protested, but Eric was resolute. The line went dead. I remained at the window, watching the street. No cars were visible. My eyes kept returning to the strange photograph. The familiar park entrance sat at the end of the block, its slight uphill angle etched into my memory. A dry, cold night wrapped around me as I stood with Eric, our footsteps unnaturally loud in the hollow air. Earlier, at 12:20 a.m., Eric had texted saying he was outside, and I had thrown on a hoodie to meet him. By his running car, Eric looked unsettled. He turned his phone toward me, showing a faintly glowing image captured at 12:30 a.m., a photo with no GPS or device information attached. Power lines were visible at the park entrance. I know where this is, he said. Let's go look. We walked down the street together. At the park entrance, everything appeared normal. The wooden sign, gravel path, and trees stood black against the sky. No glow, Eric muttered quietly. I kept watching the tree line, expecting something to change. Nothing did. You still have the photo? I asked. He nodded, holding up his photo. It looks like it's right here over those trees, he pointed. Just darkness, I replied. We stood there for a long time. Eventually, Eric proposed a theory. Maybe someone spoofed your number. I challenged the prank idea. Then, why does the picture look like it was taken here? He fell silent. We walked back to my house. He didn't come inside, just got in his car and left. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge with the lights off. My phone lay on the nightstand. I checked messages repeatedly, waiting for something new. Nothing appeared. When I opened my gallery later, the same old photos remained. No trace of that glowing shape, but with my eyes closed, I could still see it hanging over the trees, faint and silent, like a lantern underwater. The next morning, Eric's text stunned me. The photo was gone from his phone. When I asked for details, he explained the message remained, but the image was blank, as if it never existed. I checked our message thread. His screenshot from that night was intact, but the image he'd received was now just a grey box with a question mark. I scrolled through my photos again. Still nothing new. What happened that night remains a mystery to both of us. Now when I walk past the park entrance after dark, I can't help but look up at the power lines and trees. Sometimes a pale, glowing shape might be waiting where only a camera can catch it, The night was thick with fog. The night had settled over Dundee, with fog hanging in the streets like forgotten curtains, making the world feel smaller. My usual run through waterfront warehouses and flats was complete, the scanner dangling from my belt as the city quieted just past 11. Sound seemed swallowed by the mist, creating an almost tangible silence. The radio, always kept low, provided background noise to help me stay alert. For a while, everything felt normal, a local station playing a late-night show. But as I turned onto Lockheed Road, the radio suddenly went to static. This wasn't the familiar fade-out hiss. Instead, it was a thin, insect-like static that rose and fell like something breathing near the aerial. The signal flickered for a second, then cut to a mechanical silence as if someone had pressed mute on the world. The display showed no station. I turned the dial. Nothing. Then it returned, another thin, static sweep before falling silent again. This wasn't a regular broken connection, but more like a hesitation in the air. I told myself it was just interference from old buildings or the van's aging wiring. Saying it out loud made it feel less like my imagination was playing tricks. A mantra I repeated for the first 5 minutes. The fog made everything anonymous. Street lights blurred into halos that didn't reach the pavement. Terraces on Tay Street had curtains drawn like shy houses. The city's night workers were mostly gone, which meant fewer sounds to orient yourself by. Even the dogs weren't barking much. A small constant city hum had been reduced to a tick. Then the van itself started acting strange. The engine was warm and steady, but for a heartbeat, the dashboard lights dimmed slightly, as if someone had tightened a hand on the electrics. It was quick, barely a second, and the heater fan kept turning like nothing had happened. I put the van into gear, pulled up, and everything felt ordinary. One of those little failures you shrug off, because nothing major came of it. I left the rear doors open to let the fog drift through the back of the van so it wouldn't hold the smell of other people's packages. The fog inside the bay made everything look soft and out of focus. I had a parcel for a first-floor flat. When I climbed the steps, the stairwell lights dimmed, as if they were being watched. The woman who answered the door had her hair in a towel and looked as if she'd expected noise and got silence instead. She said nothing about it. People don't always say what they notice. It's easier that way. I was driving toward the docks along familiar routes when the fog started growing denser. Inside the van, the heater ran quietly while raindrops beat against the window. The radio crackled with static, breaking the silence intermittently. My scanner peeped, signaling a new delivery code. Dave's voice came through the headset, initially clear but then distorting strangely, words flattening and hissing as if swallowed and then spat out. He asked if I could take an extra parcel, and without much thought I agreed. I didn't want to be the driver who refuses work. The call dropped, and the headset showed no signal, though it recovered within seconds. As I approached the river, an unusual smell caught my attention, a faint metallic tang with a thin sweetness, like forgotten pennies left to oxidize. It reminded me of old hospitals and preserved specimens. I dismissed the thought as ridiculous, but the scent persisted around the blighted warehouses. Suddenly, the fog thinned momentarily, revealing a pale light hovering above the rooftops. This was the third odd occurrence that felt more substantial than a technical glitch. It wasn't a street light or lamp, but a soft white glow about the size of a slow-moving cloud pocket, level with the terrace roofs. Motionless, it hung like a misplaced lantern. I pulled over, partly out of curiosity, partly to avoid looking foolish in traffic, though there were no other vehicles around. The glow remained, a strange beacon over the rows of houses. No sound emerged from its position. The fog hung low, the city seemed muted with dark roofs and sealed windows, surrounded by an inexplicable luminescence. Then, without warning, a light shot upward through the fog so quickly it made my stomach lurch. It pierced straight up like an invisible wand, cutting a clear path through the mist before vanishing into the cloud layer. No sound accompanied this movement. No wind stirred. Suddenly, the radio cleared. Dave's voice returned, asking about my parking spot. I answered briefly. He mentioned losing my signal momentarily, with my GPS showing my location. No connection. I stopped in a place with no connection. The transition felt oddly smooth. One moment disrupted, the next perfectly normal. My hands trembled, though I told myself it was just nerves. I completed my deliveries, gripping the wheel tightly as the city slowly hummed back to life. Small things felt off kilter. The dash clock jumped. The 30 seconds before settling down. The phone battery, once nearly dead, now showed full charge. A route that typically takes 15 minutes stretched to 17, with a delivery scanner revealing a missed scan I'd later find in the van. These small irregularities seemed minor on paper, but they left a strange metallic taste. A pub door slammed nearby. A taxi rolled past. I stopped at a late-night van for coffee where two guys laughed about a football match. They hadn't seen anything in the fog, or if they had, they weren't talking. People often choose silence during strange moments, preferring to compare notes later. At the depot, I tried discussing it with Kenny, who parks next to me. He just shrugged, saying, "The FOB plays tricks when you're tired." Maybe he was right. Exhaustion can certainly rearrange reality. I had a conversation about the pale light and heard rumors of drone tests along the coast. His tone carried both the story and a hint of something more. By the time I left the depot, the fog had thinned, transforming into a mist that would dissolve by morning. I drove home with the stereo low, listening to the same cheeky presenter, an old man that the streetlights waved, and I waved back. His expression held that familiar look people get when waiting for someone to return home. Inside, I sat in the kitchen with the kettle steaming, staring at the circle of condensation on the window where the street lamp cast a faint halo. I didn't share everything with my partner, just the parts that sounded reasonable. A radio with intermittent signals, odd battery readings, a bright light in the fog that suddenly appeared. She made tea and nodded in that way she does when my work takes on an unusual tone. She asked if I was okay, and I assured her I was. The truth lingered in my thoughts. How quickly the light vanished in the preceding silence. The radio's sudden clarity stood out as the most reliable detail amid a night of strange occurrences. Later, I reviewed the dashcam footage. Fog, the van, the street, and in one frame, a pale blur rising. The replay seemed choppy, with the blur appearing and disappearing between frames. Static interrupted the audio. Sleep came fitfully that night. At dawn, I awoke to rain, with children playing outside and the city humming its usual morning rhythms. Fog lingered in small puddles and damp scents hung on washing lines. As the next day unfolded normally, bright roads welcomed holiday travelers and buses followed their usual routes. Here's the rewritten text. Flight 554 was like any other routine night journey. Quiet radio waves, occasional chatter from distant cargo trucks, and the familiar rhythm of autopilot. I was trimming the aircraft, watching the clear skies and slender moon, contemplating how small everything seems against the vast darkness. My attention drifted to the left window where something unusual caught my eye. At first, it looked like a star positioned about 5 or 6 miles off the wingtip, at our exact altitude. No blinking lights, no typical aircraft markers, just a dark, hard-edged shape that seemed to absorb starlight itself. Instinctively, I ran through standard checks. The transponder showed nothing. I toggled to identify potential traffic, listened for TCAS warnings. Equipment appeared fully functional, yet this object held its position with an unsettling precision, as if it naturally belonged in our airspace. I radioed Center 7K visual traffic, left 2 o'clock, same altitude. The response was routine. 7K QH Center. Roger. We show no primary or secondary target in your area. Curiosity growing, I disengaged autopilot and moved the yoke. The object matched my ground track and speed, not perfectly aligned but moving in an eerily synchronized manner. When I banked left for a better view, something extraordinary happened. The aircraft began rotating in a way that defied explanation. It wasn't a standard turn or bank, but a slow, lazy motion along a sideways axis, as if gravity had momentarily lost its hold. The movement was completely unlike any typical airplane motion, transforming an ordinary night flight into something profoundly mysterious. I was flying laterally, my bank position steady, when something began moving opposite me with an almost liquid smoothness. No wake, no acceleration, no disturbance marked its path. We moved like carefully choreographed dance partners, following an unspoken rhythm. My radio contact with the center remained constant, even as a growing unease built inside me. Traffic appeared perfectly parallel, tracking westward. After a moment of static, the controller's response was clear. No targets, no interference detected, yet something felt fundamentally wrong. I meticulously checked my systems. My headset carried a subtle, precise noise hinting at potential issues. I toggled frequencies, examined the squawk, checked the standby, and adjusted the audio panel. Everything functioned normally. PTO heat on, vacuum steady, alternators green. The panel clock blinked momentarily before resuming its routine. Ordinary systems performed ordinary tasks while something extraordinary existed just outside my aircraft. I grabbed the binoculars from under the glare shield, cold and damp, as if they'd been somewhere unexpectedly chilled. When I raised them, I saw a shape unlike any typical aircraft. Geometric, with sharp edges that refused to reflect light. No landing lights, no windows, no tail, no propeller blur were visible. This object existed precisely matching my position. When I shifted to view it head-on, it responded by banking right. I carefully maintained airspeed, avoiding unnecessary altitude changes and keeping manual control. Its movement defied conventional logic. I seemed to slide away as if tethered to an invisible string, completing a lazy turn and drifting sideways across the horizon. No noise, no thermal wake accompanied its motion, reminiscent of smoke dispersing in reverse. I contacted approach on the guard channel, reporting my tail number and the visual traffic at my 1 o'clock position, matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Their response was unequivocal. No targets detected in the OM sector. Only my transponder and known traffic appeared on their screens. Peculiar details accumulated. My watch was 5 minutes fast before correcting itself. The thermostat on the console slid for no reason when I eased back to neutral trim. My phone's recording had one file corrupted into an unopenable blob. Another file showed only 3 frames of a dark smear. Then blackness my phone described as unsupported. Pilots estimated the object was approximately 2 to 3 meters to my left. Same altitude. For 2 minutes, something shifted from a curiosity to complete absence. The silhouette narrowed and brightened like light bending through a lens. I anticipated some physical manifestation, maybe ignition, a strobe, or some explosive exhaust. Instead, nothing happened. I simply vanished. One moment, an indigo cut against the lower sky. The next, completely gone, no transit. Across stars, no streak. Where I had been was empty, like someone lifting a bird cage. Small things unsettled in the cockpit afterward. I told the controller I had a recording they could mark for engineers, but they weren't interested in the details. They just asked if I wanted to divert. Since there was nothing to divert toward, I declined. We continued to Farmington like a standard flight, approaching the runway. My hands hovered above the controls, as if not touching would somehow be safer. The wind remained steady, and the landing was precisely the kind of smooth approach these instruments train you for. After taxiing in, I left the lights on because the cabin still had an unexplained electric cooling sensation. At the FBO, I filled out paperwork between other customers and tried getting someone to examine the files. Maintenance checked my transponder traces, air traffic control printouts, and GPS log. They found nothing unusual except one tiny GPS track anomaly showing a half-second ground speed blip. The controllers sent me the radar tape. Everything looked clean. I've been flying planes for years, but something fundamentally changed that night. My name's Dave Hollis, born and raised in this part of Ohio. I worked nights at a local gas station, so foggy drives were familiar territory. This particular night was different. Driving home late outside Ashtabula, the fog rolled in, thick, low-hanging mist, swallowing the road completely. One moment I was cruising along Route 20 near Lake Erie. The next, the world turned grey and dense, like a heavy blanket had been dropped over the entire area. About 5 miles past Geneva, heading west toward home, I spotted headlights approaching through the mist. They seemed normal at first, except these lights never actually passed me. They appeared in the fog, 2 steady beams cutting through the graininess, getting closer, but never moving beyond my position. I slowed down, watching carefully. No engine sound, no tire noise. The lights stayed directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away, moving as if they wanted to meet me. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, hoping to give the other driver space to pass, but the lights simply stopped, suspended in the fog. Silence enveloped me, broken only by my idling engine. About 50 yards ahead, a soft, hazy glow appeared. Blue and white, it wasn't like any car light or street lamp. It just existed, floating 3 or 4 feet above the ground. I squinted, straining to understand what I was seeing, but the fog obscured any clear view. Then the glow shot straight up like someone had flipped a switch, rising smoothly and quickly into the sky. I always double-check everything now. The transponder, the squitter, frequency, wing flex, even the ferry thermos under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's my job, and I've been doing it for years. But when I'm heading to Farmington and something dark occupies a star's usual spot, I report a bit earlier. The controller always responds that nothing is showing. They always do. People always try to categorize experiences like mine. Weather balloon, experimental drone, optical illusion, none of these explanations fit what I witnessed. I drove home that night and filed my incident notes, giving my wife a condensed version. I didn't want to burden her with something that might sound like I was losing my grip. There was this empty patch of sky that kept replaying in my mind. As I lifted off, an eerie silence enveloped everything. The familiar background sounds vanished completely. No crickets chirped. No distant highway traffic rumbled. Not even the hum of my truck's engine could be heard. The entire world seemed to pause in that moment. Frozen and still, I switched off the truck and rolled down the window, straining to listen. Absolute silence surrounded me. No birds called, no breeze rustled. Not even the typical insect sounds emerged from the weeds. The mysterious headlights that had been present earlier were now gone. Gradually the fog began to thin, and normal nighttime sounds slowly crept back into existence. I continued driving, my eyes constantly scanning the shadowy movements in the woods beside the road. The rest of the journey proceeded without incident. An unsettling sensation lingered, the feeling of being watched, as if something had silently observed me. A strange light slipped past me in the dense fog. After I returned home, my attention was consumed by carefully checking the locks while staring out the window at the dark road. Something profound and unexplainable hung in the silence. Sleep is far more than just closing our eyes at night. It's a critical component of human health, with far-reaching consequences. Most adults require between 7 and 9 hours of rest, yet many struggle to achieve this recommended amount. The implications of chronic sleep deprivation are serious and complex. During nighttime hours, the body undergoes remarkable transformations. The brain works tirelessly, processing information, consolidating memories, and clearing out accumulated toxins. Hormonal systems regulate metabolism, growth, and stress management through intricate sleep cycles. Different sleep stages serve unique purposes. Deep sleep focuses on physical restoration, while REM sleep supports emotional processing and cognitive function. These stages cycle repeatedly throughout the night, with each cycle lasting around 90 minutes. Numerous factors can disrupt these delicate patterns: stress, irregular work schedules, electronic device usage, and poor sleep environments all play significant roles. Maintaining optimal sleep requires intentional strategies. Consistent bedtime routines, stress management, limited screen time, and creating comfortable sleeping conditions are essential. The complexity of sleep reveals its fundamental importance to human health. Without adequate rest, our bodies cannot effectively regenerate, process information, or maintain peak physical and mental performance. Sleep isn't a luxury, but a biological necessity for overall wellness and long-term health preservation. If you're driving through thick fog near Ashtabula late at night, watch those headlights carefully. I still cannot fully explain the nature of that light or its purpose, but the profound silence I experienced was undeniably real. I apologize, but it seems that the original text you intended to share is missing or was cut off. Could you please provide the full text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the original text, I cannot complete the task.